So, are these on?
I noticed it usually goes dim before it shuts off. It will just dim, and so then if you
We're
get
still
affected,
waiting
it'll
for one person to arrive, but we've got a really long agenda tonight, so I think we should go ahead and call the meeting to order. If everyone would please take their seats. This is the special meeting of the Capitola Planning Commission, and this meeting is being cablecast live on Charter Communications, Cable TV Channel 8, and is being recorded. The video can be accessed from the city's website, and our technician tonight is Victor Herman. As a reminder, please turn off your cell phones during the meeting. Please sign your name on the sheet at the podium if you come up to speak for our record. And if you will all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving now to the oral communications, are there any...
The roll call?
Oh, I'm sorry. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Welch.
Here.
Commissioner Westman.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
Commissioner Newman.
Here.
Chairperson Smith.
Here. Now moving on to oral communications. Any additions or deletions to the agenda tonight?
Not tonight, thank you.
Okay. I would like to mention that there is likely to be a delay in the final item on our agenda tonight, just due to time. So I would like to ask if there is anyone in the public this evening that's present that wishes to speak on issue number 11, the architectural and site review. That is the item that will likely be delayed. If anyone's here to speak on that, raise your hand, please. Okay, if not, I was going to let them go, but since that's there's no one here for that purpose, we'll move on, and if we get to it, we get to it. But if we don't, I don't want the commissioners pressured in time with the amount of discussion we have tonight. The Planning Commission will allow public comment tonight, but I prefer to have the public comment with each individual issue as it comes up. We won't be taking any public comments on items that are not on the agenda this evening. Unless there is someone here who has a time constraint, and if so, please raise your hand now. Okay, thank you. Moving along, any commissioner comments?
I just want to comment that I really liked the way that the meeting went last week, where we went back and forth, because as a non-commissioner, non-council member in years past, it was always really frustrating for me to get up and speak and then have the council members or the commissioners speak and I couldn't get a chance. And this is so important. I really, really liked that process. Good job. Okay.
And we'll do that again tonight, time permitting. I prefer to let the public speak first, and then the commission can speak, so we've had a chance to listen, but we'll definitely provide an opportunity for the public to speak after our discussion as well. Staff comments?
No comments.
Moving right along then. This is a public hearing, and it's intended to provide an opportunity for public discussion. So the process that we'll be going through is staff will present their report on the item. We'll invite the public to speak. We'll bring it back to the commission. We'll allow additional public comments, and then we'll close the public portion and hopefully come with some direction for staff. Starting with the issue number 16, height, which was delayed from the last meeting. Katie.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. The first item tonight will be height. And we all have different interpretations of height. First, I wanted to go give you an overview, as Commissioner Westman had asked, on how height is measured. And it's measured different throughout different communities. So here you see existing grade, and sometimes communities measure height from existing grade, so they'll have a specific height measured from the existing grade. Final grade is after, if there's excavation that takes place, it's the final grade with any retaining that occurs, and measuring height from final grade. Also, some communities measure height from the level of the street. So And there you can see that. So if that had the same 20, say it was a 25-foot height, it would have brought that home down significantly. And so first I went over where they measure height from on the ground level. Now I'll talk about where that height can be measured to at the top of the building. So some communities measure height to the top of the wall plate. And actually I want to spend time here on if you measure from the top of the wall plate, it allows for more design creativity in the height of your actual roof. So you could have a less pitched roof in this example, or the pitch could go higher and it wouldn't matter as long as you are under your top of wall plate was at that maximum. Some communities measure height to the ridge, as we do. And other communities also, to allow for more variation in height in roof design, they'll measure it to the midpoint of the roof. In Capitola, height is measured as the vertical distance measured from points around the structure where the perimeter of the structure meets the finished grade. So it's around the perimeter of the structure where it meets final grade to the highest point of the roof, ridge, or parapet wall. So in this example, you have a home which is on a sloped hillside. There's been grading that has taken place in retaining walls, and you can see the measurement of height taken towards the front of the building at the highest point, and then at the higher point within the final grade to the top of the building. So within your issues and options tonight, were there any questions about how we measure height in Capitola? Or
Good tutorial, I like that.
okay, thanks. So the discussion, when we reached out to the different stakeholders regarding height, we heard back that some of the designers in town, specifically and architects, would really like to see a little more flexibility in how height is measured to create more interesting roof pitches. And they feel that under the current height of 25 feet plus 2 feet, a 2-foot exception for half stories and designs that incorporate historic elements, that they're limited, and that that a lot of the roof pitches you see in town aren't the guidelines are the regulations aren't as flexible as they would like. So within option 1, we would maintain the existing standard. There's currently a 25-foot height limit with an additional 2 stories for half-story and historic design. Option 2 is to eliminate the 27-foot height exception. In this photo, this is a home on Bay Avenue that was built to the 25-foot limit. So when you observe that home that is built to the limit, you can see that their roof didn't go all the way up to a peak in the back because of the height limit. And they had approached us originally for a green roof up there, but that would have added to their floor area ratio because it could have been accessed. So there's a recent example. Option 3 would be to allow greater variation based on the existing neighborhood character. This is an image up in Cliffwood Heights, and as you can see, the lots in Cliffwood Heights typically have 60 feet of frontage, so they have more separation between buildings. In this image on the left, you can see Riverview Terrace lots are narrower, and they're typically 40 feet wide, and in Cliffwood Heights, the 60 feet wide. So a new standard could be on the wider lots, allowing additional height, because there'd be less impact to the neighbors with shadows. So the options before you tonight for heights in residential neighborhoods is 1, to maintain the existing standard, 25 feet plus 2 for exceptions. The second standard would be to eliminate the 27-foot exception and have a 25-foot max. And the third option would be to allow greater variation based on the existing neighborhood character. So I'd appreciate comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this item this evening? If seeing none, Commissioner comments.
I'll start. Go ahead, TJ.
Well, yeah, this is an easy one for me. I've long been a proponent of trying to allow some flexibility with roof design. To me, I think the roof design really makes a difference in a home. And when you look at the village that we have in Capitola, even more so, I think it adds the ability to add the character and charm that we have in this area. And I think we've limited ourselves in some of these areas. I think up on Cherry Way, I think it's Cherry off of Fanmar right there. It's actually an alley, so I'm not sure exactly what the name of the street is. But I'm really in favor of allowing some variation based on the neighborhood character. Would be my.
Well, since we're going down the line, I'll go next. I would like to see option number 1 modified slightly, in that I'm pretty happy with the 20, because we're talking about residential neighborhoods right now. I'm pretty happy with the 25-foot height in residential neighborhoods. But we have talked about developing some design guidelines for different areas like Cliffwood Heights. So if we could somehow leave some flexibility which says that, you know, according to if the design guidelines for that area, for example, Cliffwood Heights, could allow for heights up to 27 feet. You know, I think in normal single, you know, in Riverview Terrace, I think 25 feet is fine. I think 27 feet would be fine in something like Cliffwood Heights. I'm a little confused, and I reread it again, and maybe staff can explain it to me, the section of the ordinance about half stories. I mean, that just baffled me. So if we're going to leave that in, I would certainly like to see that section rewritten or eliminated, because I don't see that it accomplishes much for the community.
Mm-hmm.
So, no.
So I too am in favor of option 3, and I would like to consider taking the tack that we took when we were redoing floor area ratios several years ago, and we allowed different floor ratios depending on the lot size. And I think lot sizes seem to generally go together in neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods generally have street widths and sidewalks that are similar to one another. You know, Riverview Terrace has no sidewalks in a lot of places, very small lots. Jewel Box is somewhere between Riverview Terrace and Cliffwood Heights. So I think if you refer back to, I think this ordinance is still in effect, that, you know, you can have a certain amount of lot coverage with a certain size, different size lots. We worked very hard on that, and I'm wondering if we could apply that same principle to the height of buildings. So I have a couple of other minor things, but I think we're talking about this. Well, let's
All right,
yeah.
sure. So 3 is obviously consistent with the tenor of our discussions regarding how we're dealing with residential neighborhoods and the recognition of the difference between Riverview and Cliffwood Heights, etc., and that we should recognize those differences in our zoning code in some way. And so 3 fits in with what we're doing, but the devil's in the details. I mean, this is just saying, this is pretty vague. It's just saying we're going to have some variation, but someday we'll see what that is, and then we'll have to start this over again when we see the specifics.
I agree with you. I was trying to phrase mine in a way because I think we do want variation based on existing neighborhoods, but I sort of felt we should give them some direction that we don't want to see a height over 27 feet in any of the residential neighborhoods. We're not talking about, you know, allowing Cliffwood Heights to have 35-foot houses. So that's why I didn't do it very well, talked about the 25, 27, somewhere in that range for the various neighborhoods. But I can't think of any neighborhood where I'd like to see, a residential neighborhood where I'd like to see a height over 27 feet.
I think one way maybe, Katie had one of the concepts that some jurisdictions use, and that's having a top plate height, and that would regulate at least how many floors and stories and so on, and from there we could go back to, and that allows the flexibility for the roof design, but I think you kind of need both sides of that.
I think roofs, that anything above the top, the wall plate adds to massing. I'm not in favor of that because I think massing happens with roof lines as well. And I think we had a really good example of a designer, a building designer on Bay Avenue that made a very interesting building being kept within the 25 feet. I don't see builders or architects having a problem designing really beautiful buildings staying within any confines.
I would point out a couple that I think, I spoke to one of the owners, and there's a couple of them up there, and that's the area I was speaking of above, off of Fanmore, that alleyway that sits above Cherry. You have a mansard type roof there, which is basically is a flat roof, and in my mind, probably is the least fitting into the character of the area or a village, that type of roof. And then you have another one that has a sloped roof, and then it's just cut off on top to a flat roof because they reached the height. So while trying to stay within a standard, it took away from the character. And quite frankly, if it would have been another 2 foot higher, it's not going to improve the view across the street for the people. It's not going to make it any easy, I guess, nicer view for other people, because it's so impacted there. That view doesn't change whether they would have increased the pitch or carried the roof line all the way to the top or cutting it off. You just see it from below, and it just doesn't look like it. It looks like they were trying to meet a standard and had the roof line go up to the maximum level and then just cut it off to a flat roof. So I think those are areas where we would have been better served having the ability to allow them to continue up past the fixed height.
In the example that you're talking about, was it 27 or 25 that they stopped at?
They may be 25. Do you guys know? I don't know. We don't have any pictures of that. The neighborhood from.
Try to pull it up.
I should have called.
I feel like that's a design choice where you let your design suffer because you want more space.
Well, that's why I think if we had a top plate height, that regulates that part of it. So you're not going to add an additional story. And we have that half story component, but that kind of eliminates that. Then it allows some flexibility for roof design. I understand massing. My house looks very large because I have a unique, large-looking roof, but it's a small house, really, square footage-wise. But I think, at least for my wife and I,
So you have a single-story house.
Right, but what I'm saying is the roof line itself adds a character to what we liked, and whether it's our style roof or whether you're going to be in one of these areas that, and typically it's that hillside where you're going to run into that problem of trying to meet that
But you
height
do
limit.
get to measure going up the hill. I mean, the
Right,
example
I guess.
she gave us,
Right.
it gets...
Right, but
Is
see
it
if
this
you,
one you're referring to?
Yeah, it's not the one. It's actually, I think, to the left of that. But you're gonna.
Whoa, we're going.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to see from that view, and that's part of the. Well, there
That
you
one
go.
right
You
there.
can kind of see. Yeah, so I think it's the one to the right, right to your right of the screen. Oh, and maybe the one right above you. That one is cut off. I believe the roof is cut off. You can't see it. It carries a pitch, and then it cuts off more of a flat roof.
But see, I think I agree with Gail. I think, in most of our neighborhoods, with the exception of Cliffwood Heights, we have quite small lots, and the roof does become
Richards.
part of the massing of the building. And the question is, can you come up with a good design that's appropriate for the neighborhood that fits in with, 25, 27 feet? And we've seen numerous examples of where you can. It's just sometimes someone wants they want more interior space, they want a bigger house, so they sacrifice the design of their house to have more space. I mean, there will always be someone who will come in with a two-story, 25-foot box and say, I want a flat roof, this is what I want. And I don't think we can completely prevent that, but I wouldn't like to see the height limit go up, with probably the exception if you did design guidelines for cliffwood heights.
But
That's
even
one way that the variation between the measurement could be different from one neighborhood to another neighborhood. You could have the top plate in Cliffwood Heights and not in Riverview.
Right. Or and something in between in the jewel box, I believe those lots are somewhere in the middle,
When we're talking about the variation based on the different neighborhoods, do you prefer, so Gail had mentioned based on the lot size. We also have setback standards that are based on lot width, and do you, for the discussion on height, I was suggesting basing your height standards to allow up to the 27 if it's a wider lot. Is there any direction towards if you'd like to see it based on the lot size for overall square footage on the whole property, or the width of the lot so that you know there's distance in between buildings?
Well, we do it on lot size now for FAR. It's not just a chunk area that we make have a certain height or a certain FAR. It's literally the lot size within that area. So if you have a wider lot, you get more FAR, and you could possibly get more height. I think that's a good way to work it.
Okay.
Rich has got a couple of pictures up there, and you see there's actually a couple. The one that the house on the left where it's kind of cut across flat on the front, it's a hip roof there, but it goes up and then it just becomes a flat roof because of the height limits. And then two houses over to the right, the white one, and to me that thing just looks like it needs a little, like we see on Grand, it just needs that little roof line on the top of it instead of being a flat roof. But and that wouldn't even have to be a steep roof, just a little bit of a roof line there.
So what I think I'm hearing is everybody is good with going neighborhood by neighborhood with a 27-foot maximum. And
Lot size by lot size.
Lot size by lot size?
Not neighborhood by neighborhood. This is the actual size of your lot. So if the size of your lot, you have more room around the lot, and it won't look so massing next to the neighbor because you've got a wider lot.
But see, that kind of ties our hands, because in this neighborhood here, you have a hillside, cliffside where they're trying to capitalize on that slope, but we've tied their hands on the roof design itself, not so much. And I'm all for capping the height of the top plate, so we're not getting 4-story buildings there, but or 3-story even.
See, when I look at this photograph up here, it doesn't bother me in this particular neighborhood like the White House basically has a flat roof. That was the choice that they chose, because clearly what those people are trying to do is maximize their view. I think that's a pretty unique situation, and there's a house further down where they managed to get a roof in by the way they did their design. So,
and if I'm not wrong, in the village, that's a 27-foot height.
Correct.
It's only in the other
Resident.
neighborhoods outside of the village where you have a 25-foot height with an exception to go to 27. And I know I've been involved in some projects that ask for that 27 feet. And it was good for the design, and it was good for the project, and it worked. I would like to see the 27-foot be not based on historic or half, but based on design, and set it as a maximum of 27 feet. But tying it to lot sizes is not a problem.
Well, we also have to remember that we're looking at these houses from afar, but these houses are still in a neighborhood on the other side of the house. And so the massing effect for those neighbors on the other side of the house is really who we're talking about. We're not talking
Right.
about people who are viewing the house from 2 blocks away. We're talking about the neighbors who don't want to see no light from the village side, or even if it weren't on a cliff or it weren't, you know, it's still down the center of the street. That's the massing I think we're all concerned about.
No, I get that. And in that neighborhood, I guess that's why I was kind of say that the additional massing of by giving some flexibility with the roof design doesn't really change that too much, because that is such a narrow alley there anyway. So you can see what.
Well, that would change it even more, because
Well, I guess
more
what I'm saying,
massing means-
if you, Rich,
Sorry,
if
I'm
he turns it
getting-
around, he's getting it
I'm
turned
not a
around
good
there.
driver.
I'm not sure
There
where
you
we're
go.
going. Oh, here we
See, from the massing from this side, so there's a house with a roof that's been cut off. If it went up another 2 feet, on that pitch slope, I don't think that's going to change the massing that's going to affect obstruct the view or lighting to the, that's just my personal view from the neighborhood across the way. It just would give that house a little more character, like it, you know, they didn't have to cut the roof height off.
Would you have a limit, TJ? I mean, are you recommending no
Well,
limit at all?
I would rather see a limit of the top plate and then allow the flexibility with the roof design based on the neighborhood, so that we're not getting people trying to shove 3 stories in and, you know, and not have a roof. But so I would lean more that way than trying to just say 27 is always the limited height.
In my
Why
experience,
does that house have a problem, though, with the 25-foot or the 27 or 25-foot? I mean, it's 2-story. It's flat. It's a flat lot. I mean,
It's flat there, but it goes on the hillside on the other side. And I'm not, so I don't know why. My understanding was when I talked to the
Don't have any more of a
gentleman.
problem than anybody else does.
no, I mean, a normal story is 8 feet or maybe a little more, 9 feet or 10 feet if you want, but
Right.
In my experience, the minute we give a nebulous message to people, believe me, everybody will push it right to the max, and what that does is make more work for the staff, make more work for the Planning Commission, and it disappoints applicants because they're thinking that, oh well, this I might be the exception. I might be able to because my designs. Everybody thinks their design's the best, and I think the clearer we can be, the more
I understand.
specific we can be in the future, the better we'll all be, including and especially the applicant.
No, I understand. I don't want to create these large structures and that's why I think if we tied it more to a top plate height and then left some creativity for the roof design. And it doesn't mean that every roof design's got to be, not everyone's going to want a 12-on-12 pitch roof on a, it wouldn't fit in the character. I wouldn't want it for my house, right? So, I mean, I designed my house really around a roof design. That's what my house is designed around. So, you know, I just think every neighborhood's can be a little bit different, but in that area specifically, I think we tied their hands and they came out with something maybe they would have done differently had they had some flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to you, but I mean, I think I'm still sort of stuck where I was before.
Hey, it's just their opinions, right? So that's just where I stand. I think that we tie our hands by saying this is the limit on those type of things. So, and I think that those are examples right there that fall into that category.
A couple observations. You know, I think Commissioner Welch, if we were going to do that, what you'd probably end up with is some lower height limit that you measure to that wall plate, so that you get something that's comparable to the 25 or 27 feet. I mean, that could allow for somebody to build their maximum living space there and then provide some variation of roof if that's the way we want it to go. The other thing I was going to comment on is when we talk about providing variations either through guidelines or through lot size, keep in mind that we don't have guidelines today, and it may be a few or more years before we do have them. So there'd be an interim period where we might refer to guidelines that don't exist. So in that respect, maybe a lot size criteria might be good for the near term between those two options.
Right. I mean, I think the lot size criteria works because I think Commissioner Ortiz is right. You know, Cliffwood Heights has sort of a standard size lot. Riverview Terrace has sort of a standard size lot. Most of the jewel box standard, you know, it's sort of standard size lots. They sort of goes block by block up there, but each
Right.
block is
And the
sort of
width of the
standard.
streets seem to
And,
go along with those lot sizes. So the
Right.
whole thing feels like it has, the whole neighborhood feels like it has an expansive feel to it.
There is one other approach as well, that on steep slopes you could write up regulations for steep slopes. So in a situation where you have a slope that has like greater than 30% or greater than 20%, that you could review projects and possibly review a height exception within a steep slope, because there is that you want the buildings to start to step down the hill. And as they do that on each floor, as it comes to its height limit, without having to make a odd design, you know, we could set in criteria for steep slopes and put those criteria into the guidelines, such as breaking up the building, having it step down a slope, and that there would be a consideration for height.
Maybe
I
where the
was-
slope is, you know, so it's
Mhm.
away from the street, it's further down the slope.
Yeah,
I
because
was
this-
going to look it up because how Capitola measures height has changed. I think it changed in the early 2000s. It used to be that, and I know this because the house like on the corner of Gilroy and Riverview, the one that my daughter actually lives in, when that house was built, height was measured from the lowest point to the highest point. There was no variation for slope. You couldn't step a house up the hill. So I think when you look at some of these neighborhoods and the results of what have happened, you have to know when the house was built, because it could look slightly different under today's regulations than it was if it had been built in like the late 90s.
Was it 2004 that happened?
I think it was around 2004 you guys changed
In
how you
res-
measured height.
in response to
City.
Katie's comment, I think it would be nice to see something coming back in the ordinance that, because the real problem is with the sloping lots that addressed some sort of flexibility on those kinds of sites.
And I would like to see maybe if staff could review the different types of sloping lots we've got, because we've got lots that slope down to the streetscape or slope away from the streetscape. That might be different. You know, we've got a lot of sloping, and you know, we've got two major hills and a lot of in between. So
I'm wondering if it might make sense to, since we're all leaning towards the option 3, if it might make sense to answer some of the questions, work some of that detail, and bring it back when we talk about the neighborhood designs, and put height back on the agenda then, so we can look at it as we come up with the neighborhood defining characteristics. Does that work for everybody?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So we'll bring back height.
But
I can summarize
Okay.
what we've heard
Go
so
ahead.
far. So what we've heard is a majority towards option 3, to base the height up to 27 feet for larger lots based on the area of the lot, and also to consider possibly steep slope criteria and allowances for variation due to slopes. And we'll come back during the neighborhood character discussion.
yeah, I understand your thing about going beyond 25 feet, but we do have some really small lots. And I wouldn't want to see somebody who ended up with a quite small lot only being allowed to have a roof height of 20 feet. I mean, I think we have to be careful
I agree. I think
on...
minimum. I think it should be a range of 25 to 27. I think everybody feels.
Okay, 25 to
25 to
27. Okay,
27.
thank you.
Yeah.
Just the exception to 27 is based on lot size rather than historic elements or...
Okay. No, I got
half-story.
it now. Thank you, sorry.
No worries.
Madam Chair, one point of clarification. There's no desire to keep the half-story provision in the ordinance. We
Because we
can,
don't
I
understand.
don't have any...
We don't understand.
I don't know what it means. Okay.
Okay, next, height in the Capitola Village. So the existing standard for height in the Capitola Village is 27 feet. We had feedback during the stakeholder outreach that variation in height or additional height to go up to 3 stories would be a preference for some. So we're looking at different changes. So the first option is to maintain the existing standard at 27 feet. As you can see here, this is a recent a building, I think it was approved in either 2006 or 2008. And this building goes up to 26 feet on the building plans. The neighboring historic building, the supervisor building, is just a little higher, I believe, but I'm not sure of the exact measurement. Option 2 is to expand exception provisions within the village, and those exception provisions could include superior design and substantial community benefit. So here you see the lighthouse building in the village, and this is over the 27-foot height, and I believe there's mechanical equipment in the top of the lighthouse in which an exception could be utilized for mechanical equipment. But in our code update, if we'd like to have superior design or flexibility to expand the exceptions, we could modify that so a future interesting design wouldn't have to come under mechanical equipment. So, next, option 3 was to increase maximum height limit to accommodate 3 stories. 3 stories, there are quite a few examples of 3 stories. It's not the majority in the village, but here's an example on the corner of Cherry. Another example on San Jose, so this is 3 stories.
No, but isn't that one 27 feet?
I believe so, yes.
So they got 3 stories within the 27 feet.
They did.
Okay.
Yep. This is also a 3-story building within the village, a recent remodel. And here, next to the Six Sisters, is the apartment building that, with an increase for the maximum height limit to accommodate 3 stories, we could include findings for compatible and then no negative impacts to surroundings. So even though this design on the right maybe isn't the most aesthetically pleasing, I wouldn't say that it's overwhelming the Six Sisters, and whether or not it has negative impacts to the surroundings, that the design could be a little bit better, I think. So those are your options tonight. The first is to maintain the existing standard of 27 feet. The second is to expand exception provisions. And the third is to increase the maximum height limit to accommodate 3 stories. Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this item? Please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Don Sylvie. I live on Fanmar. And I think height limits, which you're really revising at this particular juncture, is really pretty wild, because if you go to a 3 height limit or 3-story limit above the 27-foot in the village, I mean, it's just going to be massive little square boxes, which is pretty much what you have on Fanmar just a moment ago that you're looking at roof lines. Those buildings are massive. They're like 4,000 and 5,000 square foot houses. You couldn't build them in today's terms. So to go to a huge new height limit, which to me, 27 foot on Fanmar would be on a small lot, would be just nuts. Unless it goes against railroad tracks. I can understand that exemption. But to go to another height limit, both downtown as well as on Fanmar Terrace, is, I think, pretty crazy. You should really take a look at how small these places are and how massive the buildings already are there in existence, which in the past you can't take them away because they already exist. But I think you should really take a look at what you're really asking yourself to do in terms of going to a height limit, both especially in the village. And I think the 27 foot on, was it San Jose? Was it, you mentioned, was it San Jose?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was, if you look at it, it's just a square box. If someone wanted a pointed roof, take a pointed roof, go to 27 foot. But, I mean, your boxes are just going to be massive in terms of just exploiting the amount of square footage. And that's it. So if you look at the square footage per lot size, a lot of the places you're looking at as say, points of interest couldn't be built today under existing codes. So you're almost wasting time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Wilk. My only comment is I agree with what Commissioner Ortiz said earlier, which is it's really important that whatever the standards are, that you make it clear, because if you leave it subject to interpretation, you go through a lot of trouble with the architect, you create designs, and all of a sudden you're at the whim of the Planning Commission to decide, well, do I like this, do I don't like this, did I have a good day, do I have a bad day? Not that you don't take your job seriously, I'm just saying that I think it's really important that whatever the standards are, and I'm a little concerned about all these option 3s that say, well, expand the exception criteria, or let's leave it to later dates to decide. It sounds to me like what you're doing is leaving a lot of things wide open to the Planning Commission to decide by fiat one day to the next what's the height requirement. So I would highly recommend that whichever way you go, that you make it clear and you add illustrations and you don't leave it vague verbiage. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak on this item? Please come forward.
Christensen. I just want to make a plea for the non-3-story option in the village. I mean, it's already, the 2 stories create deep shadows, cold wind tunnels through those lanes, like between the motel or the condo apartments and Sisters even, there's a wind canyon going through there during certain parts of the day. A 3-story option will just enhance that wind effect, and I just think it's a bad vibe for our village. You know, the village is something for all of us to enjoy. It is not for developers to max out the last upper story of their building or their property. So I ask to please just keep the zoning compatible with a 2-story and a nice-looking roof. I mean, that is the character of our village, and I think we should keep it that way.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak? Seeing none, commissioners, comments, please.
I'll throw something out at the beginning here, which is the floodplain issue, which is sort of missing from this discussion so far, because most of the buildings we saw couldn't be built today, and the floodplain requirement, I think, has gotten more restrictive recently. So I'm not sure how that plays into the height limit in the village, but you're not going to get a residential 3-story. I mean, you're not going to get 2 stories unless you really have a parking story and then 2 stories of living space. So I don't know how you deal with that.
That is a good point. Right now with flood regulations, you couldn't have residential on ground floor in the village. You can't have commercial uses. So that would be one reason to, if you were so inclined, to allow some greater height variation in the village.
I think the shot of the place on San Jose with the flat roof, those 3 stories, that kind of speaks to my concern, and I like the flexibility of allowing a roof design there, or even the hotel next to the apartments next to the Six Sisters. That had we had a height limit for the top plate for living area, and allow some flexibility with the roof design, you may have a nice pitched roof there that looks similar to the Six Sisters that add a little more character, or the box on San Jose that is the same thing. We could have some flexibility for the character and roof design, but limit the height of the top floor.
When the Six Sisters were built, property values weren't what they are now, and I don't blame people for wanting to max out their properties right now. They need to do that, and that is what happens over the last 10 years. What I've seen is that everybody needs to push that maximum floor space, maximum height of rooms. That's what sells buildings when they go to resell. And I just don't think we can look back on old standards and think that people are going to build houses that look like those old houses, that they're going to all the time use this beautiful articulation and roof. They're going to just box it out. This is what we kind of see, with some exceptions, but mostly we see people want space.
Well, I think, and to me, I like the ability to allow some creativity, but that's why I like trying to keep it within the characteristics of the neighborhood, because I don't know if those fit in. I mean, I like to give property owners every right they have to do what they need to do. I mean, they own the property, they have a right to do things with it, but within some exceptions of meeting the character and charm of that community.
Well, there's where I think Mr. Wilk is exactly right. When you leave it to us to decide what the character of that neighborhood is, you are setting the city up for getting a black eye because somebody will disagree with that. I think that's the nebulous thing that is really coming back to haunt us again and again. It has to be more specific than that.
Right.
Well,
I thought one of our main principles on redesigning this zoning ordinance was to make certain that it was clear, easily understandable, that the average person can come in and read it and know what they are allowed to do. So I'm not in favor for a whole lot of exceptions because I agree. I think it leaves it up to interpretation. It depends on who happens to be on the planning commission at the time. I think it's fairer for us to have regulations that things are within. People can always do less. But when you start allowing a lot of exceptions for more, for me it gets confusing. I'm not at all in favor for going to 3 stories in the village. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think that should be off the table. And I understand Ed's point about the flood regulations coming in, and basically what someone is looking at now is that if they're going to do a residential use in the village, the first floor is basically going to be for parking, which they technically have to provide anyway, and most of the newer buildings do use the first floor for parking. But I think for the size and scale that Capitola Village is, what gives it its unique character has been basically the, sort of 2-story height limit. And there are certainly exceptions that were built at various times down there, but I wouldn't like to see 3 stories all over the village. It's working pretty well for me right now.
Well, I think that example on San Jose, though, really speaks to that, because they have, in effect, 3 stories so they can get enough living space, and the result is sort of an unacceptable design. But that's what you have to do. Otherwise, you have a 1-story building, and it's really...
But what they had on San Jose was they had 2 quite small duplexes, and they decided that, to tear those down and to make it financially feasible, they decided that they had to have a much bigger structure there. And I don't, there's...
On Riverview, for example, that's a good place where you have that issue of parking underneath. And
right.
So the new one that was just is being built now, is that 2 living stories?
2 living stories above a garage.
Yeah, see, I mean, that's sort of where it would be unusual if the new zoning code, the result of that was that everything that got remodeled or rebuilt on Riverview would be parking and 1 story of living. That would change what we've got.
Does that one meet the 27-foot height limit, though?
So it does. So within 27 feet, you are able to get in 3 stories, and the
code... now put in 3 stories within 27 feet, and some people do it like that new house on Riverview.
And what does option 3 mean?
Well, I think option 3 meant to go beyond 27 feet.
To go beyond 27 feet. So we've had feedback that, including commercial on the ground floor, typically commercial on the ground floor will, in new development, will be 11, 12 feet high. It's higher than your second and third story. So from our designer stakeholder group, there was feedback of, in order to keep that trend of 11 or 12 feet on the ground story, and then to allow for 2 additional, stories, it would have to go beyond 27 feet at that time. And as the floodplain, as our numbers are updated on a regular basis, the level of the floodplain does go higher. So what was a 9-foot floodplain where you couldn't start your living quarters until it was above 9 feet, I believe in the I remember Mark Wheeler referencing that it had gone up at some point to either 10 or 11 feet. So that's another thing but as that, if the floodplain level were to come in higher, that could come back before the Planning Commission to reassess at that point and say maybe we should, it went up another foot, maybe we should consider another foot to allow.
It's all just
But
leading to flat roofs.
Yeah.
That's the final result of this.
Exactly. That's why I am not in favor of making a lot of exceptions. I want to make it clear what our standards are, but I keep leaning more towards the top plane. I understand in the village with the floodplain it adds some more difficulty, but it certainly is going to take away from character. You're not going to have the character that was once there. Even the bungalows, you're just going to put these square boxes trying to maximize.
But I study art, and what I hear from art teachers all the time is that an exercise that they value is some kind of constraint. It brings out creativity. It enhances creativity, and it makes the artist or the architect in this situation really think about what they can do to make it good. And I think there are examples of people who don't do the box, who still figure out how to articulate the building, how to make it work. And yes, they're going to get less square footage. But isn't that what it's all about? I mean, we're going to have to limit square footage if we want to limit large buildings in our neighborhoods. We've got to limit square footage in the house. And doing that means that the architect has to figure out a way to articulate the roof and still get as much square footage as possible. And I know it's possible. We've seen it done. It's just smaller inside structures. And I think that's what we're talking about here. That's the difference. We either maximize the interior space or we ask them to reduce it some, because we don't want the scale of our village and our areas to be any bigger than it is now.
I think I agree. I have a different view of the village most of the time from up in the jewel box, and when you look down, and even if it's a flat roof box, it fits. And if you start having, peaks in all of that, even though it might look architecturally have more character on its own, it's going to change the nature of the village in another direction. So whether it's 3 stories or 2 stories, if it fits in 27 feet, I think it works. And the only time that there should ever be exceptions to that should really be under a lot of scrutiny. I don't have any problem at all with the exception that was made for what we call the Lighthouse House. And I can't remember how tall it is at its peaky peak.
2 more feet or something like that.
Okay.
2 more feet?
2 more feet or something like that.
Or something like that. Yeah. And I wasn't here when all of those decisions were made. So I think it fits. I think there should be some room for some variation, but 27 feet should be 27 feet, and they should be able to design something nice in 27 feet.
They can. It's done all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what I'm hearing is to move forward with option 1, keep the regulations the way they are today, and not build in exceptions. Okay.
I think that's what...
And
Go ahead.
So one thing that's very common in zoning codes is a height exception for sort of non-habitable space, for some sort of architectural element to add some sort of visual interest to a building. Is that something that the commission
I
would...
thought we had that, you know, chimneys can be a little taller than 27 feet, little,
That's what the lighthouse building relied on to get that extra 2 feet, and
right, is it
it
right?
was an exception for, as you said, mechanical.
Yeah, I think,
Well,
So that is an existing provision that you would like to see
I
carried
thought
forward.
that we currently had that in our code, and we should keep those in there. I think you can have a little exception for an elevator shaft for
Yep.
a couple other things.
Okay, next we're going to move forward with the Village Hotel and issue 16C. So again, here's the slide of what is currently allowed within the village for height. This is specific to the theater site in the village. Within the general plan, there's an overview, a statement that the maximum height of the hotel should remain below the elevation of the bluff, and also that the bluff should remain legible as a green edge with existing mature trees maintained on the site. Within option 2, we could establish performance standards based on the general plan. And within suggested performance standards could include that the hotel be below the elevation of the bluff, that the bluff remain legible as a green edge with existing mature trees, and that also variation in height be required along the street frontage to complement the existing streetscape. So as you go down Monterey with the variety of heights of different buildings to keep that pattern. Within option 3, the future hotel, we could establish a numerical standard unique to the hotel. So in this image, you can see the rooftops of the homes that exist adjacent to the future hotel. And leading off of that, we could establish a height from sea level that would be in line with, again, maintaining that bluff and creating a measurable height above sea level. So again, the option 1 for the hotel would be apply the current standard of 27 feet. Option 2 to establish performance standards, and option 3 to establish a numerical standard unique to the hotel site. Discussion, please.
Want me to- Well,
Oh, I'm
public.
sorry. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this? Please come forward.
Dunn Sylvie from Fanmar, and I'm for option 1, 27 feet. I think it'd be just great. Otherwise, we should go right to the max, have the cars drive right off the top of the cliff from up there on that wonderful thing, go in the parking lot, so we go all the way to the basement and go about 3 or 4 stories down from there for parking. I mean,
Only if
that
we get a
might
water
just
slide that
work.
goes into the ocean.
And then I think we should kind of go out in the bay about another 200 or 300 feet. I think you kind of get my drift.
Thank you.
I think some hotels should be there, but I think some of the plans for an 80-room hotel is crazy. I mean, way out of line. If you start going into height limits, for example, where are you going to put air conditioning units? Right on the roof? I would think the people above them are going to go absolutely nuts with the noise. Forget the service people are going to be coming in 24/7. They're going to park on Fanmore and Terrace. I can't wait for that one. I'll be here every night waiting for you guys, sleeping about right about there.
It's about
So-
height right now. We're going to deal with
Well,
it.
height and sleeping and
Yeah.
noise and a few other things all go together. But I would think, at least think about the height and the number of units that you guys are going to be putting in there. And a hotel, I am for.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak on this issue? Please come forward. Oh, seeing none, Commissioner comments.
Well,
Go ahead.
I don't see how we can establish numerical height standards for a hotel now, because we don't have a hotel design. The community hasn't even talked about, the hotel, other than at one general plan workshop, and, that wasn't an application that people were looking at and processing. That was just a discussion. So I don't see how we can, establish numerical height limits for a design that we don't know what it's going to be, or how it's going to impact the neighborhoods or views or anything else. So for me, option 3 is out. I agree that where that property is located, that it might be proper to step it up some as it goes back toward the bluff. And whether that step back is going to end up with a 3-story building, whether that step back is going to end up with a 4-story building, I don't know, again, because we don't have anything concrete that we're working with. So option 1 doesn't work for me, staying with the 27-foot height limit. So I think we establish some sort of performance standards, some sort of designation that we all agree this is a unique site, that, if there is going to be a hotel there, then we need to look at that specifically and how it will fit into our village and what it potentially could accomplish as far as economic development. So I think I would be in favor of option 2.
Yeah, I am in favor of option 2 as well, but I'd also like to see some articulation toward the back of the bluff, not just at street level and stepping back, but some kind of, so that we don't end up with a mass against the bluff, because that's really what we're going to see from certain angles. People on Jewel Box are going to see, and so some articulation and some what we want maybe to have it look like in the end is that if you go back to the picture of the houses, where we've got, if it fit, I think the thing that will fit in the best is if it looks pretty much like it's that type of small building variation, instead of, and I'm looking at it right over your shoulder, instead of our lovely old hotel that we had there, but it was a different world. There was a forest up above. We had a different world then. So I think today, when I look at this picture, something that's articulated similar to the houses, possibly not those same designs, but those shapes.
Good.
So I'm in favor of option 4.
Which is?
So, I believe strongly and have always advocated that we should be a government of rules and not men, which is sort of what the gentleman was getting at in the audience, and so that when people who buy a single-family lot know what they can build, etc. But that doesn't apply here. This is a unique, one-time site, and I see no point in building in a bunch of rules in the zoning code for it. I think it should just be, there should be a separate category for sites that had historic hotels that burned down, that Patty Reed ran, and and anything that can fit within that. Then the rule is that they bring a plan in, and it'll be vetted and ultimately decided by the city council. And to try to sit here now and build into the zoning code a bunch of rules for that hotel doesn't make sense to me. So option 4 is basically automatic review.
BJ.
I think I'm on board with option 4 now. Short of that, though, I like the performance standards. Just some real guidelines. It gives them some direction, so that first automatic review goes nice for them. And I think part of that is, being consistent with the roof line and even the bluff there, so we don't have those type of concerns, because we know we're going to deal with those issues. But outside of that, I agree. I think it's a unique one lot, and I don't know why we'd spend a lot of time writing codes around one specific piece of property.
I'm going to have to say that I'm kind of on board with that as well. I went through a bunch of the conversations about the hotel when we were doing the general plan, and they started out with something that looked similar to the Grand Hotel, and there was a contingent of people that thought the Grand Hotel was great and we should bring it back. And what the community sort of rallied around was that's not what we want. We want something that fits. And that site is so unique that to try and define what fits is difficult without looking at a project. The performance standards are a little bit difficult for me because I don't know how you define them. This is one of those items where when you guys get it written and you bring it back and we sit down and look at it, the devil's in the details. But for that site, seeing a project plan that fits with all of the discussions that have been had about the articulation, the stepping back, the design and variation in architectural design that we want to see there, I think it's going to stand on its own merits at that point. I don't think we can provide numbers that are going to make it work.
Yeah, I don't think we can come up with numbers now.
I don't think so.
Okay. We're clear that you want to build flexibility into this option, and we'll come back with a draft that builds in flexibility. So thank you. So next we're going to talk about visitors serving uses in Depot Hill. So in the aerial that's shown on the slide, you can see the variety in lot sizes. Towards the left-hand side of the slide, it's more, the majority of Depot Hill is residential. And then at the tip of Depot Hill, the general plan designation, this is where the Monarch Cove Inn is. At the very end, the general plan designation is visitor accommodating. So within visitor accommodating, as it's explained within the general plan, that area is for a mix of overnight accommodations. There's also provisions for ancillary visitor serving food and service establishment, and the general plan designates a maximum floor area ratio of 0.5. The general plan also has an overlay for visitors serving, and within the visitors serving overlay, the uses are also for accommodations, as well as ancillary visitor serving food and service establishments, and it says to apply the development standards of the R1 zone. Now we'll go into zoning. There's overlays within the visitors serving. So one overlay for uses is specific to the Monarch Cove Inn property. There's another overlay for visitor serving titled El Salto that has separate uses tied to El Salto. And then there's also the VS overlay and different uses that are conditional uses within the VS overlay. There's also within the VS zone a height exception. So the height limit within the VS is 30 feet, and then similar to our early discussion, there's an allowance of up to an additional 6 feet if 4 findings can be met within the code. So as I was explaining, within the Monarch Cove and El Salto overlays, there are different conditional use permits as seen. So the Monarch Cove is the first list, and then the El Salto property is the list of uses. Some of these uses could have a great impact on the neighboring residential, such as temporary festivals, live entertainment, and commercial entertainment and recreation. Within the Monarch Cove property, these would require a conditional use permit. On the El Salto property, they are prohibited. And then when you look at visitor serving overlay, there's actually more variety in the uses within visitor serving overlay. So, for example, restaurant uses, I believe, are in the visitor serving or bar. And again, temporary festivals, weddings, live entertainment. So within the visitor serving use, this came before, there was a lot of discussion, I believe, during the general plan. Also when we reached out to stakeholders of the zoning code update, it was also a lively conversation of what the existing impacts are to the residents. So we've heard that there's multiple existing problems with the use, such as parking and noise and events. Also, the new visitor serving uses, if allowed, would increase and intensify these problems. And then permitted intensity of new visitors accommodating uses would kind of compact and intensify the problems, impacts on surrounding single-family neighborhoods. Within our options, of course, our first option is always to maintain the existing permitted uses. Option 2 would be to modify the permitted uses. And I should have deleted Monarch Cove after that, because it's for Monarch Cove, El Salto, and then the visitors serving overlay. So for instance, within temporary festivals, instead of a CUP for the Monarch Cove, it could be prohibited. Live entertainment and the commercial entertainment and recreation. And as we look at these options, we must remember that any changes, although desired by our community, we also have the Coastal Commission to modify the code for them to review this. So this is the visitors serving, and this is the visitors serving area, as we saw in the first map, extends beyond the El Salto, and it's more in the single family area. And in that, so for visitor lodging, possibly change that to bed and breakfast, and then the other uses such as an RV park, campground, restaurant, or bar to prohibit. Just an example of how the code could be modified. The third option is to limit intensity of the visitor accommodating uses. So we could limit the existing height, lot coverage requirements, or the habitable building area, or the number of guest rooms. And option 4 is to rezone the entire area to R1. Within this option, new visitor serving uses would be prohibited. The existing uses would be allowed to continue. This is a very tricky one. Our general plan has visitor serving within the general plan statements. Also, the Coastal Commission, where we already have a visitor serving designation up there, I think this would be a hard sale at the Coastal Commission. So those are the 4 options, but I think the 4th one would be very difficult. So again, maintain existing permitted uses. The second option is to modify the permitted uses. Limit intensity of the visitor accommodating uses, and then also to rezone to R1. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. How many people in the public are here to speak on this issue this evening? Please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I would like to...
Can we get questions of staff before we open it up to
Sure.
questions for staff? Because I think there's something that I got an email from Mr. Grunow, who's our the head of our community development department, and it was a little more forceful. The terms you used that pursuant to your talk with the Coastal Commission were a little more forceful than I just heard from Katie, and I really think the public needs to hear what they told you.
Katie's much nicer than I am. I have a problem with bluntness at times. We did meet with the Coastal Commission, I believe in February, and we went through a host of issues that we were going to be discussing, many of which they really couldn't comment on. This was one, though, that they did have strong opinions, at least at the staff level, that they would not support rezoning and removing the visitor serving designation, and even went as far as to say they don't think they would want any limitations to future expansion. They were more open-minded to limiting the number of uses. We pointed out that the code would allow things like circuses and carnivals and raceways and RV parks, and we're not so sure that those would fit in with the neighborhood, and I think they would be willing to entertain those. Certainly, if it's the desire of the city to try to rezone it, staff's happy to continue those conversations, but it should be understood that the likelihood of success is probably not real high.
Thank you.
So
Sure.
I have one question about process. The city recently adopted a general plan, and they included in there the visitor serving designations that are there. And it was my understanding what we were doing right now was we were going through the zoning ordinance to try and make it compatible and consistent with the new general plan that had been adopted. So we have a lot of flexibility when it comes to making recommendations about, changing language in the zoning ordinance about uses up there, eliminating some of the uses, restricting some of the uses. But if we were to choose rezoning, then the city would have to then go back and redo its general plan and then go to the Coastal Commission with that. So, but we can make zoning changes, not land use designation changes, but changes in the zoning regulations.
That's correct. I mean, if it was the will of the city council to make that amendment, we would have to amend the general plan in conjunction with the zoning code update. Could be done, but again, there would be some issues potentially with Coastal Commission.
Okay. Any more questions of staff? Okay. I understand that we have a group of people that have a presentation that will cover several people. And as we are allowing 3 minutes per person to speak, I have set a target time for that presentation and a hard limit at 15 minutes. And I believe that that represents a group of people, and I don't know if you've got signatures or hands raised, but how many people that raised your hands that are here to speak are part of the presentation, and how many of you are independent? Independent, raise your hands, please. Okay, this is how I would like to handle this evening. Because we do have a presentation that represents a group of people, I would like to hear that first. We'll have the presentation. We'll allow the commissioners to ask questions of the presenter, and then we will open it up for the rest of the public. And again, as individual public members come up and speak, the commissioners, if you have questions, are welcome to ask those questions. Then we will bring that back to the commission, and we'll have our discussion. Time permitting, I'll allow public comments after that, and we'll limit those public comments at that point to 2 minutes per person. And then we will hopefully give some guidance or move forward. So that's kind of the outline of how I would like this to proceed. So the presentation will be first, please.
If I may clarify, do you want the timer on the presentation, or is it already set for 15 minutes? Do I need?
I'd like for can you set the timer for 15 minutes?
I think so.
Okay. If you can, I would like to. I know this is gonna run on, and I want to acknowledge and give everybody the opportunity to talk after, and so I want to just try and manage it to be efficient.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And my intent is to be done in less than 15 minutes. Great. So Katie's going to help me and drive the slides. So I think the first issue is really a visual, which is, if you can see, if we look at the segment of the map here that's visible. I'm sorry.
Introduce yourself.
I apologize. Yes. My name is Adam Samuels. I live at 504 El Salto Drive. So if you look at the view of Depot Hill as I have it here, what's represented there is 330 odd households. And if you look visually, the area in yellow is zoned R1. The areas at the far right end are the areas that we're talking about here. Those areas that are kind of subject to automatic review, that are zoned as both visitor serving and R1, and then the piece of the Monarch Cove property which is visitor serving. So really, I think our key point here is, there's more than just zoning here, as several people have mentioned. There's really this interrelationship between the neighborhood and how it works with the Monarch Cove. There's the zoning as it's currently defined. There's the conditional permit we have, which is specific to the operation of Monarch Cove, and which, as you all know, has not been complied with or been able to be enforced for a period of time. So I think part of what we're trying to accomplish here is, through the general plan and what's required there, and in the zoning, deal with the fact that the word I think is a fair one is unworkable. I think people are making their best efforts, but I think we can't rely on the operator to consistently follow the terms of the CUP that's been in effect since 2001. The city staff don't have the resources, and it's not clear whose role it would be to enforce the conditions of the permit. Officials are doing their best, but there's really, I can't call a council member to ask them to count heads if the operator is doubling the number of people they're allowed to have at an event. And then I think the last point, which is worth noticing, is as a visitor-serving facility, we would expect there to be public access, and the operator currently limits that on a regular basis. So I think this is just really an excerpt from the report, which says, the zoning really isn't consistent with the neighborhood. If you look at the large percentage of the neighborhood is residential. This one section historically has been visitor-serving, but there's a conflict. Thank you. The next slide. So if we can't enforce the usage, the zoning remains unworkable. So the policy, whatever you guys choose to implement, it has to reflect the workable use, both for, to give credit to the operator, plus to the neighborhood and the community as a whole. So we have to solve this problem, I think, of how do we make it work? How do we make it possible for the operator to run the business? How does it make it possible to not impact the neighborhood if there's problems? Or the city in terms of having to enforce the code, which you basically have written. And I know that there are people on the city council and the planning commission who were involved in that when it was written 15 years ago. And I think everybody's intentions were good, but there are also a lot of people that say that the policy as it's written is not enforceable. So just to comment on the options, I think, to maintain the permitted use, operating the bed and breakfast could work, but the events don't. The events are really the problem on an ongoing basis to the neighborhood and community. And part of that is that the city doesn't have the resources to enforce the current permit. The second option about modifying uses is kind of interesting, because if you would limited the operation to just bed and breakfast and didn't allow events, that might meet the majority of the neighborhood concerns. And that also would satisfy the Coastal Commission and give them ongoing access. The third option, limiting the intensity, really talks about future development. And that's at least my understanding of these things. And I think, Katie, please correct me, because I read intensity mean you couldn't make it bigger. That's about the size and scope. So if we could limit the intensity in some way, that could support that. It's pretty clear from the discussions we had when the application was on the table last year that any increase in the number of units, size, or density on that property will aggravate traffic and many other issues that we've got in the neighborhood. And then finally, the fourth option, I think conceptually rezoning would be ideal, but realistically, as we say, there may be a challenge bigger than any of us could deal with in terms of the Coastal Commission. So I don't know. What I would say after hearing you all go through a couple of these items today is I think maybe there's a hybrid approach. Maybe we can limit the events or discontinue the events. Maybe we can limit the intensity so there's not an opportunity to allow for future expansion, or limit it so it's going to work for the community. And I think really all there is to say is thank you, because I know this is a toughie. And there are people who are passionate about this on many sides, and I appreciate all the effort that's been given towards this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So can we ask some questions? Because I just want to... Okay, you have to help me a little bit, because
Sure.
I'm new coming back to this and,
yes.
and what people are talking about. So do we have a zoning slide, or could we use his zonings? Katie went through and... All right. So help me out. So what I consider, and I got corrected today because it's now Monarch Cove is sort of the light purple area, visitor serving area up
Correct.
there.
At the far end, that
Right,
lavender
right.
area.
And then the darker purple area is now some sort of visitor serving R1 district.
It's zoned that way, but in practice right now, there are single-family homes and one multifamily residence. The former, I think what people describe as the El Salto Resort, is kind of on the cliff edge. This property piece, I think, originally was owned by a single family after Blodgett sold it off, and it's been divided since then.
I can clarify
Thank
a little bit further. So the light purple is visitor serving, and there are specific conditions tied to the Monarch Cove part, that area. The second, the deeper purple, is visitors serving, and there are specific conditional uses tied to the El Salto property on that property, which is, it's not as open as the Monarch Cove. And then next to that, the dotted area, which is it's a visitors serving automatic review in R1, also because the dots are for visitors serving. There's more. It's all the conditional uses listed within the VS overlay.
So if you're in the yellow dotted overlay area, you can do like vacation rental homes in that area? I mean, I'm just...
No.
No?
No.
If you're in the darker purple area, can you have a vacation rental home in that?
No. You can, so in the dotted area, you can have a single-family home. You're not in our transient overlay zone, which is in the village, so there's no transient nightly rental allowed up on Depot Hill.
Okay, so what does the visitor serving designation do? Because, I mean, it seemed...
I'm going to pull up my other slide.
I was just, I mean, I went through them this afternoon, and I was trying to understand, you know, what you can do in each one of those areas. I guess this was sort of all done in like 2004 and 5, and someone obviously had good intentions, but it's pretty hard to understand.
So
it says like on the El Salto, which is the dark purple, you can have hotels, motels in bed and breakfast there.
Mhm.
So in the dark purple, I could convert my home to a bed and breakfast,
yes. Yeah.
or I could convert it to a hotel.
Yes.
Is the same true in the yellow dotted area?
So it is. So in the yellow dotted area, you could have any of the conditional uses listed within visitor serving. So there's actually more. There's, aside from your lodging and your bed and breakfast examples, in addition, there's restaurants allowed, establishments also that serve alcohol is allowed, employee housing, and as well as the temporary festivals, weddings, live entertainment.
Okay, thank you.
So,
I
you're
just
welcome.
wanted to understand what those areas were.
I know.
Any other questions for the presenter? Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who supported that presentation. It was very well done. If you'd set that timer for 3 minutes, please. Other members of the public that would like to speak on this item, please come forward. And it's okay if you want to go ahead and line up.
My name's Mary Michael McTeague. Mine is an emotional appeal, and most of what I wrote has been shot with the discussion of what the Coastal Commission has agreed upon or has spoken to you about. I live on Depot Hill. I've lived there for 20 years. And most of my pitch was an echo of Gail's comment when she talked about this, which say we had a different world then. Capitola is much more densely populated now. Its summer festival is much more well attended. The junior lifeguard program and the camping program are the most popular in the county. Participants come from Los Gatos and San Jose, as well as neighboring towns, filling up the town with waiting parents and grandparents. The Wednesday evening concerts, the surf contests, and the races are attended by more people than ever before. This is a visitor-serving town. The whole town is a visitor-serving place, and Capitola does it well, but it's becoming, I think, larger in scale than maybe was anticipated. Depot Hill maintains something of a bucolic nature. People come all year round to walk on the cliff and through the streets. They enjoy the ocean, they enjoy the gardens, they walk with friends, they come with dogs. Depot Hill is a parkland, and this is visitor serving as well, although maybe of a more calm nature. My idea was that when the El Salto Resort was rezoned as visitor serving, and I did not understand all the implications of visitor serving that Adam clearly presented to us this evening, Capitola was a much different place. I thought perhaps that the Coastal Commission might see it important to preserve the biodiversity of Escalona Gulch and the Butterfly Sanctuary, as well as things like cliff stability and ocean sustainability. Not more crowds coming to take over those places with automobiles. And I realize maybe that those visitor serving issues have outlived their time. And my other concern was, as Adam's was, that the zoning mandates were not being regulated. The conditional use permits that came with the wedding ceremonies and the festivals and the parking that caused so much distress to the nearby residents, the city offered no way that, oops, time done.
You're going to have to conclude
Thank
now,
you very
please.
much. That was pretty much what I had to say.
Thank you very much.
Oh, hi, I'm Carla Christensen. I live up on Depot Hill too. And you know, I can only echo what some of the other comments, the earlier comments. We spent an enormous amount of time last year, an effort to force the owner of the VS zone property to back off of his development plans because they would have intensified the use, threatened the monarch sanctuary that's in Escalona Gulch. And there were other reasons too. I mean, since the CUP was approved, I can't remember the year now, but almost the first season of weddings after that CUP was initiated, the neighbors were upset and complaining, and they were not demonstrators. They're not, you know, they don't come marching down here all the time, but they were consistently complaining about the traffic, the parking, the flouting of the number of visitors, and it just has never been workable. And now that same owner sold off that property, the area of the Monarch Cove and El Salto Resort are very much smaller now. So to intensify that will only increase the impact on the rest of the neighborhood. So it's an inescapable problem to allow the zoning to permit more intensified development. And that because that development is directly in conflict with the current nature of the neighborhood. All the rest of the neighborhood was originally a vacation, you know, it was part of the Capitola vacation area, and all of the other owners and residents have given up their vacation serving status. There is no, as you've already said, there is no weekend, daily, nightly vacation rentals, no VRBO, because it's not permitted in the zoning. And so there's this direct conflict. Right now, there's a lot of visitors coming up to the bluff. There are a lot of people visiting coming up the stairs or up Escalona, and there are no sidewalks. This is a really pastoral neighborhood. It's very much appreciated. People come from, it's a target from out of our county and out of our state even. People want to see Depot Hill. They don't need to stay there. They can visit there. So I just would really appreciate that we permitted the current bed and breakfast, but not extend it, and certainly not let the current owner expand any further on his property. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else liking to speak on this item? Please come forward.
My name's Don Moshe. I also live on Depot Hill. I don't have anything original to add to this. I'd just like to echo the concerns that Adam and Carla raised. I think one thing that you might consider if you talk about increasing the intensity up there is how poor the access is currently to get to the Monarch Cove Inn. You're on very narrow streets, there are children, there are pets, there's parking on both sides. If you increase the traffic up there, I think you're just going to make a bad situation even worse. So I guess I'll just limit my comments to that. I think you'd need to consider access if you're going to increase any kind of intensity up there.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Seeing none, I would like to structure our commission comments on this a little bit, if I could, just in the name of efficiency. And I think when we did the survey, and originally the commission was reasonably split on 3 different items. What I'd like to do is take those 3 items and talk about them one at a time and see if we can't come to an agreement on those 3 items. Yes?
Can I ask the staff a legal question first?
Sure.
I mean, none of us are attorneys here, but you know.
Wait a minute.
Oh, well, you're not a city attorney. Yeah, we don't want to put you on the spot, make you be a city attorney. But so with that caveat, but it's my understanding from working in planning for years that the conditional use permit that was issued for El Salto, I mean, the reason it is called a conditional use permit is that if the applicant is not abiding by the rules of that conditional use permit, then, you know, people show that and it comes back to the Planning Commission, or probably in this case, I don't know who issued it, the City Council, for review, and we have the capability of revoking that permit. And I guess it's also my understanding, even if we completely rezoned that property, that the conditional use permit will still be there unless it comes back to the city and gets revoked, because it wouldn't go away with any action that we would take related to zoning or anything else at this point in time, because it has been issued.
Commissioner Westman, you're absolutely correct on both points. In addition, this specific permit did have revocation condition, which if the City Council desired, they could certainly review the permit and modify or revoke it completely. And you're also right on the kind of grandfathered, quote-unquote, clause. If we were to rezone, they would be legal nonconforming and could continue to operate.
Okay. And that would go, if they sold that business, that those conditions would go along
with the land.
The sale of the property.
Correct.
Right.
And just to clarify, the Planning Commission does not have the authority to revoke that conditional use permit, but the council does?
That's my recollection. I would have to go back to verify that, but I believe the City Council originally approved that project, and therefore they would be the body that would be empowered to revoke it.
I think what was last meeting, or 2 meetings ago, I read the revocation ordinance up here. It says that the staff brings it to the Planning Commission that has the power to revoke a conditional use permit.
Yeah, this, you know, I think the way, and I'm probably treading on dangerous territory, but I think the way planning law works in California is that the body that approves a permit would have to be the one that would review it and then decide to modify or revoke it.
Right, I agree with that. I think that none of us are attorneys, so we could be wrong because we're talking about legal things. But it was my understanding that the group that issued the permit is the one that the appeal would be made to, which is the City Council, and then it would be up to them about whether or not.
Better change that portion of our code then.
Yeah, let's rewrite that.
Really?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for
Yeah,
staff?
sorry, I
No
just wanted
worries.
to understand how that fit into our discussions.
No worries, it was a good question. So the three different things that we were sort of split on. We're discussing uses to eliminate, or if there were uses that we wanted to pull from the visitor serving, or discussing new permitted uses, and then the rezoning to R1. And what I'd like to do, if you guys are good with it, is take those independently. So talk about what we could all eliminate, and then what new restrictions we think we could add that would make the thing work. And then finally, if we don't have a consensus on that, talk about perhaps changing the zoning. And if there are other items that the commissioners want to discuss as well, I'm open to that. I'd just like to cover these three independently so we don't get all mixed between. So if we could talk about the uses, and for Monarch Cove and El Salto and the visitor serving, what uses we think are ripe for being eliminated.
I'll start. I think temporary festivals could. What I'm thinking of is what's the Coastal Commission likely to go for? I mean, I'm willing to go up against the Coastal Commission on a lot of this stuff. Some of it, I'm not willing to be the Don Quixote thing. It spends a lot of time. It spends a lot of money. Let's do what we think we can really get done, and maybe push it as much as we can. So I'm saying temporary festivals, live entertainment, commercial entertainment and recreation. And those are the ones I think we could prohibit.
I would get rid of accessory offices and retail uses. I don't see why we need to have those up there.
Well, if you want to have a little gift store and a bed and breakfast, I don't think that should be any kind of a problem for anybody. I mean, it's those types of things happen in those types of resorts that I go to, and it's not like you have a big shop, but
I don't think anybody's going to be upset that someone's selling mugs and T-shirts within their bed and breakfast. I think, and the office is an accessory to the business. So if they need an office, I don't have a problem with them having an office in one of the buildings if that's what they need up there. What's your thought about that?
Yeah, I would think that when they came in for their conditional use permit for their visitor lodging, you would deal with all the things about, are they going to have a gift store? Are they going to, provide food for, a continental breakfast or whatever, but say you don't want a restaurant. So I think we sort of have to take them separately. I mean, I think we have to talk about what uses we would eliminate for Monarch Cove, what uses we would eliminate for the zoning that's the El Salto, and what uses we would eliminate for what I call the yellow dot area, because I can't come up with a better name for it. So for the Monarch Cove, for me, I think that it ought to be possible for them to have single-family homes there, because you're allowed to have single-family homes in the other areas, and he may ultimately decide that, single-family homes is the appropriate way for that property to be used.
But I think when you look at the zoning, you've got the Monarch Cove property is the farthest away from single-family homes, and introducing single-family homes is just going to perpetuate the problem that we already have, which is the conflict between the more intense visitor serving and the single-family homes. The El Salto property, having both, is sort of a buffer to the then true R1 residential zone. I think you'd just be introducing perpetuation of the problem by allowing...
All right, I hear what you're saying. Okay, so we've got those three that we would eliminate.
Also, I think, that, again, other similar visitor serving uses, too nebulous, too open for interpretation. I think if the Coastal Commission lets us, we should just take it out.
I could go along with that. So basically what we're saying on the Monarch Cove property is they could have some sort of visitor lodging there, and how big it is or whatever would be determined by an application that was made to the
Maybe
city.
the next thing we're going to be talking about.
Right. Okay.
Right. So my question about the public pathways, it was a good point that Adam made, and that is that right now we don't have public pathways up there. Does visitor serving mandate that they keep those pathways open?
Commissioner Ortiz, it doesn't, and the pathway up there has been in dispute for a long time, is my understanding. There's no ownership that can be documented back from the original subdivision, I think in the late 1800s. So it's been in dispute. I think a lot of the neighborhood makes prescriptive rights claims, but a court has never perfected that. So right now it's just kind of this orphaned parcel with clouded ownership.
Right. If the Coastal Commission has, through a permit, required the public access, then there are provisions for making that open. If it's just been public access by, because people have used it, but there's no official public access up there, then I think it becomes more of a gray area.
Thank you.
So my question about where you're going with this is that I haven't seen the conditional use permits for those properties. I don't think they were included with our materials. So, I mean, I don't know if they say anything about live entertainment. If so, then prohibiting live entertainment is a moot point. Can you enlighten us on that at all?
Yeah, the conditional use permit does allow for live entertainment, just no amplified music or a PA system. Also allows for weddings, of course, up to 75 people. I believe there's a lesser amount during the week, 75 during the weekend. And you're correct, the permit would remain valid if we change the zoning, but no new uses would be able to be established. Or if this use were discontinued for a period of time, they would lose that vested right.
So I think we're looking at the future, what could be done in the future. We're not changing anything that's going to be happening right now.
Mm-hmm. I would look at this maybe in two ways. One is because we do look at it in the future and the property has been for sale and we haven't found anybody to purchase it yet, but I think the R1 single-family home certainly makes sense because my understanding is one of the investors that looked at the property was looking at doing single-family homes there. So I would like to see us include that as an option. And in that case, that means that conditional use permits would go away and we wouldn't have that issue up there. I can agree with the getting rid of the temporary festivals, the live entertainment, commercial entertainment, the other similar visitor serving. I think, we have the Depot Inn has been a great neighbor to that neighborhood. They do a bed and breakfast. They've been a great neighbor. We don't really see issues with them. We have a person who's just been a poor neighbor and hasn't really taken into account the neighbors that they have to live with day to day. So I think if it's going to stay there, if it's going to stay a bed and breakfast, I can live with the 11 units that it has. The public pass is in the zoning code. I don't understand how we could have that in the zoning, and to me it seems that is where the Coastal Commission would have the concern the most of having public access to that area. Otherwise, I don't know why they would have a big issue with the conditional use permits. But
So if we can just stay on the eliminating, what items we would eliminate, and if we don't have any more on Monarch Cove, move to El Salto. And are there any items on El Salto that you would want to eliminate?
Okay. I mean, I'm not finished with that because I think the problem with allowing R1, not making it all R1, but allowing R1 is that from the Coastal Commission goals standpoint,
It'll be
what
vacation.
they don't want. They
Right.
don't want visitor serving that serves the whole public of California, theoretically, to be converted to homes for a few.
Right. And a couple times when I've dealt with them in other jurisdictions like Half Moon Bay, they allowed a property to be single family, but only if it was 100% vacation rentals. And to me, that's the worst because what you have is, a home that a bunch of people come and stay in and party, and there's no one there to manage it, supervise it, or maintain it. So I wouldn't want to see that happen up there.
And then
Right
for-
now, it's prohibited
For
in
El
Monarch.
Salto, I don't think, does anyone have a conditional use permit that's active right now for El Salto?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I would move that my
How
recommendation
could they
is we get...
build the single-family houses if it requires you to have a conditional use permit for a single-family home?
That is zoned R1, is it zone R1?
That's a good point. I'd really have to research that. I don't know if those houses were built prior to the zoning requiring the CUP for single-family residence or not. That's
I thought we had
possible.
CUPs for El Salto. I thought we had one.
Well, I would take away the CUPs for all of it, and if it has to stay for single-family dwellings, they're already there, but I don't know how they'd get rid of the use of the house.
Sure, we
but-
have a CUP for the one multifamily, that short-term vacation, well, it's not a
It's-
vacation
it's in a-
rental, it's a...
it's being used
I
as
think
apartment.
People like, businesses use it to house long-term people visiting for business purposes. That's what I've heard.
That's the fourplex on the El Salto.
Yeah.
Yeah, my understanding
See,
is it's used as an
what
apartment.
concerns me, for the property that's the Monarch Cove, sort of the light purple, to me, that has been a hotel visitor lodging property for years and years and years. I can't go back and tell you exactly when it was zoned that, but, it's for a long, long time, it's been there. And to me, that property is separate from all this sort of crazy visitor serving space where we're allowing people to build single-family homes or whatever, but it's not really single-family homes. And those are the areas where I could sort of see visitor serving designation, having a battle with the Coastal Commission and saying, this area is developed as new single-family homes. It is not they're not going to be torn down and a hotel go here. I mean, the only thing that can happen here is that they're going to become vacation rental houses. And that's the one thing we don't want. So if I was going to pick my battle with the Coastal Commission, it would be to say, the area that's shown on this is the slanted yellow. I don't, it's not visitor serving now. They've allowed other things to be built in there. Why would they want to continue that as visitor serving? So that's the part that I could see changing. And
So
I
what you're
agree.
Excuse me, I just want to clarify, what you're saying really is in the visitor serving, you would eliminate all of the items that are listed in the CUP, all of the things they can do, hotels, weddings, bars, restaurants, that whole long list.
In that area where it's slanted and has already been developed as single-family houses, I think that's just, sort of something hanging over the neighborhood about, what if kind of thing. I could see leaving sort of the solid yellow, because I agree with Gail. I don't think we want to be Don Quixote and go in and, not win anything. And then when you get to what is the resort property itself, the blue, then look at the uses that can be there.
You're talking about the slanted, you're just talking about this part, right?
Yes. Yeah, not that part.
So you're talking about leaving that part along Park Avenue, visitor
Yes.
serving with the entire list of things that it can be?
Well, I don't think you can do anything. Isn't that the railroad
That's a
right away?
railroad.
And that's
And
why
it's also a monarch butterfly habitat.
yeah,
and
that other
that's
piece
not
of
gonna ever
property
get
is
developed.
owned by the state of California. Gail's right, for a monarch butterfly habitat. So I think you do want to leave the rail trail because that sort of works, but we probably don't want to allow restaurants and hotels on it.
And I still think that El Salto, the darker yellow area there, that I don't know when the last time there was a use permit. Those are mostly single-family homes. There's that one fourplex, but maybe someone in the audience knows, but that's been an apartment as far as I know. I don't know about it being used as
Could
a...
have changed, definitely. I don't know.
So I would just say that we we eliminate those use permits in that area that haven't been used, and then...
But you can't, I mean, the ones that have the use permits have them.
What I'm saying is nobody has a permit there.
But I think we need to have him look that up, because Dale thinks they do have a use permit, at least for the
Maybe they're
newer
not using
ones.
it right now,
and-
but they might
yeah.
have
Yeah.
one.
If
We
they
don't know.
had a conditional use permit, though, by our code, if they didn't utilize it within 1 year, it's expired.
But
So-
you say they have to get a conditional use permit to build a single-family house. So what are you going to do, make somebody tear down their house if they don't live in it? I mean, that,
No, that
Doesn't
would
quite
obviously be
Oh.
the exception, but I think that what we talked about as far as visitors serving those areas that they haven't been used, that we don't allow those use permits in that area. And I'm all for that property becoming a successful nice bed and breakfast.
Right.
Depends on who the new people is going to be.
Well, I
So
think we're
can-
getting into the next,
Can we go back to the
list?
the list? So you have one that's Monarch Cove and El Salto, and I think we covered that one pretty well.
Yep.
The visitor serving one,
automatic review.
this one. So this is all of the yellow hatched stuff,
Mhm.
and there are 2 sections of it. And I don't think you want RV parks in either section. I don't think campgrounds work. I don't think restaurants or bars work. Employee housing is cool. Daycare centers, we know they can be there. Temporary festivals, I wouldn't think that works. Even if it's a rail trail, I wouldn't think that works. Weddings, live entertainment, commercial entertainment, other similar visitor serving uses. And everything else remains at a CUP level? Or are what you guys saying is that's going to come up for the discussion of rezoning?
well, I would, if you're going to, get rid of the hatched mark as being visitor serving, then it just becomes sort of standard single-family residential, and you don't need a conditional use permit. And I would eliminate the multifamily housing part of it. I mean, I think that's basically a single-family neighborhood up there.
You do have that one fourplex, though, so I don't know if you call
Yeah.
that multi. You have the fourplex that's already there.
That's true.
And I think
Right.
there's
Yeah,
space
but
for it,
stays-
too.
It's just legal non-conforming, it's not.
Oh, that's true.
But I think there's space for it to continue to offer the option for multifamily homes. You want to eliminate it as a possibility?
I would eliminate multifamily homes up there. I don't, but that's just me. I'm not going to, die over that one, but I sort of see it as more a single-family neighborhood.
Bed and breakfast?
We're talking about in the yellow hatch part?
Correct.
No, I wouldn't do a bed and breakfast there.
I think we could take a two-prong approach and say what we're really going for is to take that area out of visitor serving if we can find a way to get the Coastal Commission to go for it, which I think we're going to be talking about in the next phase
Right,
of this.
right.
And if we can't, let's come up with ones that we can't live with so that it's a fallback for
Right.
us.
Okay.
That gives you a good understanding on the eliminate part?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
The next one was new restrictions. Are there elements of the current activity that's allowed within the stuff we're not eliminating that we would want to
So
add to?
does this new restriction apply to all 3 areas? Or are we going to divide it up into different areas?
I think that we should divide it up into different areas if there's a difference. But if there's something like, for example, shuttle accommodations to minimize the vehicles going in and out.
Well, see, for me, in the yellow area, I'm going to make that single family, so I would want to see that conform to the traditional single-family development standards.
And I'm on board with that same concept,
Yeah, me too.
So this would only apply to the Monarch Cove.
the Monarch
So
Cove.
this would only apply to the Monarch Cove property. And for the other, what you call the El Salto property, again, in my opinion, that stretch should conform to what are single-family development standards, since that's what's being built in there. I don't see why you let, in that little yellow strip, somebody have a building that's much taller than sort of the rest of Depot Hill. Doesn't make sense to me.
Would you consider that the fourplex, there's a fourplex and there's also a home, a single-family home on the fourplex property? They came through and did a subdivision application recently. So just on the property of the fourplex, keeping that as part of this visitor accommodating area, or that should be R1?
Well, what I'm saying is, I think if we're really, really lucky, we might be able to get the Coastal Commission to take that yellow hatched part on Depot Hill out of the visitor serving, because we could demonstrate it's really not, it's already completely developed.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't push to have the two purple pieces taken out of visitor serving, because I don't think we can go that far or we would be successful. You know, I'm trying to come up with a negotiating place with them that might have some success of winning. And I think part of that negotiating would be saying that, you know, for the Monarch Cove property, while we're going to eliminate a number of the uses, that you're going to leave that so that, you know, it could be developed. How intense that development is would completely depend on the application that would have to go through the city's processes, meet all the environmental concerns, traffic, and those kinds of things. And, you know, I'm in my personal opinion, I think that would ultimately end up with a size project that fits in the neighborhood and works in the neighborhood, maybe not what the developer would want.
And you're talking just exclusively about the Monarch Cove property and not the El Salto property?
Right.
So the El Salto property would still have the diversity of uses. It would still be visitors serving, but the development standards would revert back to R1?
I would, personally, my opinion is I don't agree with that. That hasn't been used for that purpose for a period of time. And so I think we can make the argument with the Coastal Commission that it hasn't been used, and I don't see where it would be used. And separate from the Monarch Cove area, which is obviously an area that could be developed into a nicer bed and breakfast area.
I think we could structure our argument so that we start with, you know, what we really want, and then we have our various fallbacks. So I agree with you. I'd rather start with what you're suggesting, plus some others that I would like to suggest later. And
yeah, I don't have any difficulty.
And then move off that if we have to.
Right.
You know.
Well, the idea here is to develop a code, though. I mean, we're going to come up with a code, not a it's not a negotiation yet, at least.
I think the code will, what we ask for in this code will be a negotiation.
Well, let me ask the staff then that. Are you going to negotiate the terms of this code before you bring it to the City Council for approval, or are you going to get it approved first and then take it to the coastal?
A little bit of both. I mean, we intend to continue to negotiate. You know, once we get direction on some of these issues, we're going to return to the Coastal Commission, talk to them about where we think this is going, try to negotiate some of those points. But
before you bring us back a drafted...
We'll certainly initiate that process. My guess is we won't reach resolution on all issues, and that'll carry past the local adoption phase of the project.
So if we adopt a stricter code, then they will eventually allow, they will just ask us to redo the codes once they decide otherwise.
They would go through their process, and then they would most likely give us a letter saying that we would conditionally agree with these changes, and then we would debate whether or not those changes are acceptable and continue to negotiate as needed.
So we could go with the stricter, and you know, it's not like they're going
Certainly.
to close us down as a city or anything. Let's do it.
So
we can propose anything we'd like, and we'll see how it goes.
If we go the direction that everyone seems to be going here, then I think we're left with the Monarch Cove, the issue of intensity. You know, I don't really think we need those changes. I think we can just go with the existing.
I could live with that.
I want a little discussion on lot coverage. You know, I would rather see the lot coverage go down a little bit. 50% lot coverage, I don't know. It just seems like we're giving a dual message about the amount of development that can happen, and I know it's up to 50%, but
What is it now? Does anyone have any
It's
idea?
50%. Oh,
No,
well,
I mean the
the
existing.
ordinance, I don't
the
know.
footprint of what is
Yeah.
there now.
Well, I can say it's below 50% because the proposed expansion was going to, and this is from memory, so forgive me if I'm saying this in error, but I want to say it was somewhere pretty close, maybe 47, 48%. There's also a requirement in there, and I'll try to pull it up momentarily, of a certain amount of landscaping on the lot that also affects how much development you could do there.
So, I mean, I'll take the opposite side of this, because there's a balancing here, really, and where we're going here is, you know, and I think we're doing a lot, and I understand the concerns of the neighbors, and I think the operator is partly responsible for those concerns. But, you know, it's possible we'll get a better operator in there. And the balancing here is that we're taking areas that were kind of marginal, and we're saying they're going to be residential really now.
Right.
And as part of the balancing, I think we should be looking at the one that's furthest from the residents and saying that visitor serving use is appropriate there, and with proper controls, the intensity isn't that bad.
Well, if they can
Right.
put a 42-room hotel on there, the intensity is pretty intense. So I think, you know, that makes, and you know, when you look at the floor area ratio and the way they were designed that, 42-room hotels a pretty big impact in that area. So I don't know how we modify that to limit the, you know, the room size, the hotel size. They're going to do that. You know, my thought was if it was going to stay a bed and breakfast, then it probably wouldn't move that direction. But
You know, I'm pretty confident in this city and, you know, the planning commission and the city council about dealing with any application that comes in. And there's nothing that says you have to approve a development that allows them 50% lot coverage. And I think that 50% came about sort of artificially with underground garages and those kinds of things. So I could go along with Ed's, because, you know, I think we're making some big steps here. I'm comfortable with the steps we're making. I wouldn't be comfortable with going any further.
I mean,
So
they still
I
have to
would
have
leave
they're
the
going to have to
existing.
have traffic and those kinds of
Yeah,
studies and all.
you're going to have all that.
well, we had all that. It was, and then I'm not saying that it would have ever got approved, but I think again we talked about earlier about making our intentions clear to, and I think it leaves it really vague. If someone's looking at that piece of property and they see, well, here's what I can do on there.
The words no limit.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
That's the
So-
problem.
So I you know, and again, you know what, if we're basing all these, you know, concerns on what the coastal commission is going to say, I say we do what we think is best for the city, and then we negotiate with them, and don't do something in fear of what they might say. Let's just say what we want to do, and then from that point we can deal with them.
The other thing, and I don't know, in talking about adding limits, I don't know if it's appropriate, and correct me if it's not, but I think that anybody who does a hotel or any other kind of development down there needs to have an off-site traffic management plan that gets approved with their development plan, that says they either own a piece of property or they lease a piece of property. They have a valet service that keeps all of those people that do come to the event, which would be greatly reduced. But it keeps them from all driving up there and dropping people off and driving away. I mean, they stop them.
But right now, we're talking about a zoning ordinance. We're not considering an application to develop it. We're not, you know, even in, you know, the hotel down in the village, I think a lot of people have the same concept, but we're not putting in a zoning ordinance, this is what your project has to be, which I personally don't think it's appropriate. I think you have to have, you know, your zoning regulations, and you have to have some confidence that that it's going to work out. And there's lots of wording about, neighborhood compatibility and stuff. So, as I said, I think dealing with, the other areas, we can't solve, everybody's problem. I'm not in favor, I'll be honest, of coming up with regulations that, doesn't allow some sort of reasonable development to take place. But it's everybody's interpretation of what, that kind of, what's reasonable. But I think as a community, we've done pretty well with that, and we will continue to do.
So with the limitations then and the further restrictions, what I'm hearing is basically stay with what we've got.
You're not hearing that from me.
I have a question. Yeah, I have a question.
Dale and TJ are not saying that.
Yeah. I'd like you to explain to me what the difference between lot coverage and habitable building area are.
Habitable building area would be the area within the hotel that is habitable.
Oh,
And
right.
lot coverage,
Is the
it's actually the
footprint.
way the regulation is written is 50% of the lot must be landscaped. So there's a landscape requirement of 50% of the lot being landscaped. So the habitable building space is the area within the building that is habitable. It'd be good within a hotel to further define that. There's a lot of back of house that goes with a hotel. So if habitable is any space that can be occupied, or you don't want to run into, we should define that clearly in the
That would
updated code.
include rooms that you can sleep in, not restaurants, not rooms that you can walk
They
in.
can't have a restaurant up there, we've already said that.
Was that in another area?
In the hatched area, you could have
That
a
wasn't in this area.
restaurant. I believe food establishment, let me go back.
Well, I don't
Food
wanna get- I don't wanna get
establishment
off on that.
related
Just
to lodging is allowed in
in
that
habitable area.
with a conditional use permit, and that's habitable space,
That would
yes.
be habitable space.
Mhm.
I don't understand
But-
the word no limit. I mean, I really think that we can work with that. I think.
Well, if you look at the star, it says currently limited by other standards.
Right.
It's just parking and lot coverage, so and it's sort of the same question as the
And the
hotel
floor
down
area.
here by the old theater site is how much do you want to
Right.
address it by code provisions right now versus a decision if and when an application is made?
And the no limit language in this table is maybe a little bit slightly misleading. I think it might be more accurate to say not addressed in code.
Yeah,
I
you're
could
right.
live- I could
That's
live with
much better
that.
wording.
Yeah.
I'll take personal
It's
responsibility for
emotionally
that.
charged.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
So can we sort of leave it and let it bring it back, and then we'll fight, we won't fight, we'll discuss one more time?
I am in favor, though, of considering asking the Coastal Commission to limit development in some way on this particular piece. And I think that phone conversations only go so far. I think we need to, at some point, schedule them to come out and actually walk that neighborhood, walk up there, drive up there, and see what it is we're talking about. It's one thing to show them or show them pictures, but I can't imagine that that they would still think that a 40-room, whatever you want to call it, hotel, works in that kind of neighborhood if they would just see it.
I don't think they've ever indicated that they think a 40-room hotel works
Well,
in
that's
that
true.
kind of neighborhood.
That's true. No.
I mean,
But they don't want us to limit the any growth. That's right. They told you that was something that they were very opposed.
They want you to leave your options open.
I think that's a fair characterization. I mean, we didn't get into numbers. They might be open to some reasonable limitation. If we said you couldn't have more than 500 rooms there, I think they'd be okay with that. But if we said you can only have the existing 11, that might be a different story.
So the Coastal Commission only deals with approval or not approval of our zoning code. When an application comes through, the city denies it or grants it or denies it. If the city denies it, the Coastal Commission doesn't then grant a city permit.
That's correct.
That's correct.
They could
Yeah.
overturn a city approval, but they couldn't overturn a city denial.
And
Yeah,
in effect, give a permit to someone to build something that the city
Yeah.
won't. So it's,
yeah.
and I want to make clear that my thoughts on this are not strictly what the Coastal Commission will or will not agree to. I think that they have a point in the fact that they are representing the whole state of California, and there's a balancing between those of us who live in a really desirable area and other people who want to come to visit that area. We like everything that they want about our area that they want to come to, but sometimes we don't want anybody else to enjoy it, and we have to balance it. We all do who live in Capitola,
We
no
all
matter
do
what
live in Capitola.
neighborhood you live in.
Right, and Gail's Bakery has to balance it all the time. Susan and I live across from the Shadowbrook, which has some really raucous weddings on
They have
Sunday.
some, yeah.
And you just, you know that it's part of being in Capitola.
And I have to reiterate again that the El Salto property it may not be visitor serving today, but it's still that buffer zone that should, from a zoning code perspective, be maintained as a buffer zone, because if you just move the R1 right up against Monarch Cove, it's just going to proliferate the problem. And Monarch Cove
That's what
has
you have
been-
today, though. That's
Yeah,
what we have
the El
today.
Salto is
Today
visitor serving
single-family
today.
dwellings up to the property line, and so I don't know why we would give the people option to try to move that back. You know, if it was a nice bed and breakfast, good neighbors like we have at Depot Inn, you wouldn't have these people wouldn't be here today probably. But the truth of the matter is these people are not good neighbors. They haven't shown to be that in the past, and so the single-family dwellings that are already there are having to be the impact to I think go ahead and try to. I think it would just make the issue. It would just move that issue out a little bit further if you said, okay, now you can add more visitor serving as far as bed and breakfast or those area into those in that yellow slashed area, the El Salto area. It's just going. You're going to see more of the neighbors up here if that's going to happen. Some of those people live in that little yellow slashed area that have raised concerns about this whole concept. So.
But if we're going to try and take the yellow hatched area and convert it to R1, then the El Salto property becomes even more important that you maintain it as a buffer.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't see
Well,
it that way.
I don't see that it provides a buffer now, because it's already been pretty much developed as single-family houses and one fourplex. So, but I don't,
It's kind of like the Depot Inn's the same thing. You know, you don't have a buffer there. You have homes right up around the little bed and breakfast there, but they're good neighbors, so you don't hear the complaints coming from there.
Would you like me to summarize where I've heard, what I've heard for direction?
Thank you.
Because I think there's agreement, possibly there. So within option 2, that was definitely the direction tonight, was to modify the permitted uses. For the Monarch Cove, there were recommended changes to temporary festival, live entertainment, commercial entertainment, and other similar visitor-serving uses. And to modify the language for the single-family home and multifamily to allow those to possibly occur in that area. So changing from prohibited to CUP. In El Salto, the desire is to have the development standards of the R1 zoning in the El Salto property. It seems as if there's a disagreement between the overlay, whether or not to keep the overlay as visitors serving El Salto and just decrease these lists of uses within the visitors serving El Salto, is what I'm hearing.
What I heard Gail say, and I could go along with it, is that perhaps we could start out with just leaving the Monarch Cove property visitor serving. We're pretty pragmatic that we may have to give up that El Salto piece if we can't have any success there, but that's sort of a negotiating tool.
But I think if you do that, you should still prohibit single-family homes in the Monarch Cove.
Yeah, I was
yeah.
going to say, I thought that we...
Okay, so that's
yeah.
clear. And then in the hatched area, currently designated as visitors serving, that would the request would be to remove that hatched area as visitors serving and not affecting the area around the rail trail or the open space for the butterfly habitat. Okay, thank you.
Well, we're getting into the historic preservation later on, but there's also some, there are 3 historic buildings up there that we would like to, I would like to preserve, and so I don't know whether that's appropriate to do within this.
It's the next issue.
The next, yeah.
Well, I don't, not this one. I don't know if it's appropriate to do it here or in the last issue. You've already moved us on from.
Well,
I think
we
legally
could highlight that within the overlay.
I think 2 of those are already listed, at least in our inventory, and the third one we identified as important in the EIR at least, so I think there's some groundwork there to protect those in the future.
Okay. Our next discussion tonight is on historic preservation. When we reached out to our stakeholders, actually I'll wait.
Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, within our the general plan update, the stakeholder outreach, and the survey, there was a lot of concern for historic preservation. We heard from the public that they'd like us to adopt clear standards for including properties on a historic list. That is one part of the code that exists today, but the standards, there's about 10 standards which are all-encompassing. Also, to establish a procedure and criteria for the city to approve or deny modifications to historic. This does not exist in our code today, so when applicants come in, we have to walk them, explain the process to them, but the updated code will have procedures and criteria for review of modifications. And also we heard a desire to adopt and maintain a list of local historic resources. And that won't be within the zoning code update, but we can address the clear standards to include properties on a historic list and how one would go about creating that list. Within the new zoning code provisions, there are 5 items that we've suggested will be in the update. The first is procedures to identify historic resources. Second is the criteria associated to those historic resources for identification. Also, procedures and criteria to modify a historic resource will be outlined, and criteria to approve a demolition of a historic home, and incentives for historic preservation. So those 5 will be in the updated code. So looking at the 5, the first we'll have our zoning code update, and those 5 steps will be included. Following the zoning code update, we plan on one of the most important next steps in our zoning or in planning in general was to look towards design guidelines and create new design guidelines for the city, and then also if the city were to choose to update a historic property list. I think there's a mix of sediment around the city of whether or not to update a historic property list or to continue requiring applicants to go through the step of doing a historic review when they bring in an application to modify a historic home.
Are you saying that we would do one or the other? Because currently we do both.
I'm sorry, I'll go back. So right now what we do is we require the applicant, we hire an outside consultant to do a 523 report of the historic, whether or not it's historic. So if we were to update a historic property list, we could actually hire a historic consultant to create an inventory of the entire city. And that would take out that step when an applicant comes in to have to do the 523. They could say, I'm a designated building.
I'm sorry, let's just back up and say that currently our list, you call our list, which we call the survey, right, has not been adopted. So it's not an adopted document. It's a document that we use, but it has not been adopted.
So yes, we have lists. We have an architectural survey, the little book,
Right.
we have a list of potentially historic structures which has not been adopted. So on that list, that's what we look to as staff as the potentially historic. And then we do have a list of structures that have been deemed historic, and those are along Cliff. There are structures, I think the staircase on
Are these features
but
you're
they're
talking
features.
about?
Sorry,
We're talking about
features.
features, right.
Yep. So there are some features as well.
Right.
But
We have a list of features. We don't have a list of structures. We have the survey and a list of features.
we also have a list.
A list of structures.
A list of potentially historic structures, yes.
But it
don't know
was
if anyone's
never
ever seen that.
adopted.
But it was never adopted.
Where did that list come from?
And where is it?
I have it with me.
I have one also.
Yeah, it was a list that was put together by Carolyn
2006.
Swift at the museum and some other people, just to, sort of identify what could be historic structures. So when they came into the planning department could say, yeah, this might be, so we need to do a little more research on it. That's
This
all it is.
confusion is a good argument for this little yellow box here.
Yeah. So this was created in 2005, and at the same time they had created a guide for reviewing historic projects, and that was also never adopted. But there is a guide in the planning department that
Right.
we have for reference. But, so yes, there's lots of confusion. When you open our zoning code, the only thing that is really clear is you need a conditional use permit to modify a historic structure. There's no criteria associated with that. And also, there is a process for identifying historic features. And that's what it's limited to right now. So within the questions of next steps, one option is to establish a historic resource board. With a historic resource board, they could help us with the next steps. One, the review of designation of historic features. So as those applications come in, your historic resource board could review those applications. They could advise on historic district design guidelines or historic design guidelines. They could also advise the Planning Commission and City Council on any matters pertaining to historic. They could be the overseers of the list. So if we were to do a future list, an applicant could go to the Historic Preservation Board to ask that their house be removed from the list or a house be added to the list. And then they could be they could review additions and modifications, or that could remain under the purview of the Planning Commission as it is today. So again, here's the upcoming steps. So zoning code update, the Planning Commission is working on design guidelines. Oftentimes design guidelines are set up when you have as many historic structures or potentially historic structures as Capitola does. You'll have guidelines that are specific to historic structures, and then guidelines for homes, infill homes that are in areas that are dominated by historic structures. So new infill will have certain guidelines, and then the historic structures themselves will have guidelines. So during the design guidelines, the historic board could play a role in the review of those guidelines and make a recommendation to the Planning Commission. And then also the update to the historic property list could be one of their main roles if a board were created. Otherwise, those roles would be the Planning Commission. So also within the historic preservation, we could establish a new historic preservation overlay, and this would apply. Currently we have a historic preservation overlay that's or residential overlays for Cliff Drive, Cherry Avenue, the Venetians, Lawnway, Riverview Way, and then Six Sisters, and it's tied to the Central Village Design Guidelines with specific criteria within those guidelines. So if we were to adopt a new, an overlay zone, it would highlight to an applicant that special permit requirements are within this area and that their design standards should be met, and that also incentives for preservation would be included. I want to show you how this fits in with where we're headed. Currently, if we were to adopt a new overlay, the function of the overlay zone would be it would mostly highlight to the public that they're within an area with a concentration of historic, and that needs to be considered within their design. The review criteria at this point would not change because we don't have updated guidelines. So it would remain that the applicant needs to have their application reviewed as a design permit and then a CUP if it's historic. So nothing really changes in the process. It just highlights that they're in an area. If we were to adopt a overlay zone once the design guidelines are updated, within those, the overlay could play more of a function, because if the guidelines are subject to that area, that overlay zone, and it's the historic structures within that zone and then any new infill. So tonight when you're giving us direction on this one, know that if you don't think we're ready for the overlay zone yet, then the proper time could also be during the design once we have design guidelines. So also historic preservation to establish new enforcement and penalty provisions. This is an example in Pacific Grove. They established financial penalties for structures that were in violation of the city's historic preservation ordinance. Another approach to this is at the time of development. So if a historic resource has been approved for a conditional use permit for an addition, you could take in a deposit or place a lien on the home and tied to their preservation plan and making sure that they follow a preservation plan. So there's two ways to go about it. This is more enforcement and penalty. The other is more the city taking in an insurance to make sure that the plans are followed as specified. Also, we could establish new maintenance and upkeep provisions, and so you would add language specifically within the code to require that historic resources be prevented from demolition by neglect. So again, the options are to establish a historic resource board, also to establish a new historic preservation overlay, establish new enforcement and penalty provisions, and new maintenance and upkeep provisions. Thank you.
Questions of staff? I have just one, and that's a short explanation or description of the difference between an overlay zone and a district.
So an overlay zone, you would maintain your same zoning underneath. So for the example that I provided, you would still have your central village in the village and then the R1 up on Depot Hill. If it were a district, you would make them all one district. So.
Okay, so it would be a historic district, like we have.
Oh, do you mean a historic district?
If it's the districts,
I'm sorry.
we have the
I thought you meant
underlying
a zoning
still
district.
applies.
Right.
Yeah, so a district goes before it would go to the state, who would take it to the federal government to be approved. So.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. There's just a big difference between the overlay and the district, and I know we've been talking about this for a while, and I want to make sure everybody understands that what we have now on Riverview and the Venetian and Lawnway and the Six Sisters are districts, and what we're talking about is an overlay. Okay, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this item? Please come forward.
Peter Wilk again. Excuse me, I should have some water. I think that this is being unnecessarily made complicated. I think the notion of just creating a simple list, I mean, it's a relatively small city. You could come up with a list of properties that are considered historic, and then you wouldn't have to have all the boards and evaluations, so that you have a start with the list that's unofficial, have that reviewed, have the community weigh in on that list. I think it should be a very short list because you're affecting people's property values, right? If you have own historic home, you're going to It may affect whether you can sell it, what you have to do, how to maintain it. You talked about you got to keep upkeep, certain amount of upkeep on these certain homes. And so that sounds like a very messy process. The whole notion of getting a questionably historic property and then going through God knows what to get it approved or to modify it or to update it. In fact, I've seen in the Planning Commission just recently go over a home in Depot Hill that was rotting away, and the guy wanted to fix it up, and there was all kinds of issues about, well, I don't like that garage door because it's not historic enough, and all this kind of, So I think it would be nice and clear if you just say, these are the historic homes, you can't touch the Six Sisters, Lawnway, whatever they are, come up with that list, and try to keep it as short as possible, because, again, you're interfering with people's lives and their properties. I think we're creating history every day here. There's a building going up right near the train trestle. That's probably going to be 20 years from now. You're going to want to say that's a historic, because it's so beautiful. We're building beautiful buildings all the time, and you should allow people to do that and not say, no, that shack is historic. You can't touch it. So, again, I would recommend just creating the list, and most of these other issues go away.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak on this issue? If not, Commissioner comments.
I'll lead off. So having to do with option number 1, establish a historic resources board, I'm not in favor of establishing one that would last forever and ever, and I don't think the word board is the right way to do it. I think we could, the City Council could convene an ad hoc commission or committee or whatever they want to call it that would do some of the things that we need done in the interim. That would consist of a couple of planning commissioners, a couple of city council members, our architectural historian that's on contract, and possibly Frank Perry, who's on the museum board. I think Susan has some other comments about that. And that they would put forth the design guidelines and do some of these things that we need, create the list and do some of the things that we need. I also think that eventually we need to separate ourselves, not with the existing districts that we've got, but with future districts from the state of California, and create our own guidelines for historic districts that are much more lenient, that create more sticks than they do, create more carrots than they do sticks. I'm not interested in any of the sticks up here. In my true world, I would love to have those, but I know Capitolans don't want those. They've proven that time and again, and that is not how we're going to get something like this passed. We're going to get it passed by making people realize that we'll give them lots of great bypasses if they maintain their historic home, such as a pass on parking requirements, be more lenient on parking requirements, adopt the Mills Act here in Capitola that would give them tax rebates. There's all kinds of areas that have done lots of carrots, and we need to find out what those are and approach it that way so that an area really wants to do that. I think any area that has seen what Central has seen in the last year, couple of years, with development coming in, areas like that are ripe for this kind of thing, because I think the majority of citizens who live in that neighborhood want to keep that neighborhood character the way it is. We just have to make it palatable for them. What else do I want to say? That's about all for right now. I am interested in getting seating some kind of an ad hoc commission to get new guidelines, to create a new local historic code, and move away from the California code.
So I agree with. I like the idea of creating an ad hoc committee to sort of look at historic preservation, because this group will be able to get public input on how they think, guidelines should be developed, what should be classified as historic, how the whole process is going to work. Because I wouldn't be comfortable with us just saying, right now, putting in an ordinance a whole bunch of rules about historic preservation, because we need to have the community come together around this issue if it's going to be successful, and have some input into, how they would see this work and what they would include in that. I would also like to see, we are a city that I think is extremely unique in that we have a city department, which is the Capitola Museum. I mean, we have a city employee who works for us running our museum. And I know the planning staff is quite overburdened right now with, new zoning, coastal implementation, all sorts of things going on. So I just, wondered if there was, any possibility that Frank Perry, who's our current curator at the museum, could, be involved in sort of doing a lot of this work, certainly survey work and all of those kinds of things. Are probably right up his alley, and to try and eliminate some of the burden from the current planning department staff for how we would go about it. The difficulty is that this approach, doesn't give you any direction about what to include in the current zoning ordinance. I mean, you have your sort of 5 goals up there about what you want to have in there, and I would like to see those happen. I'd like to see a procedure written down for how you determine what's historical and some of those things, but we're sort of in the middle here, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. What we'd like to do is at least lay out the procedures and the process in the code so that it's clear. But what we are not prepared to do, at least at this time, is to develop a historic preservation program. We don't have budget, we don't have staff resources. Certainly things could be shifted at the council's discretion, but something would have to give. So
We do have a surplus.
we have budget.
I think
we have budget.
People who want this will have to go and ask the council to allocate some money for someone to
Oversee it.
And from our perspective, in our work program, if things go as planned, by the fall of this year, we hope to have the housing element update, the climate action plan done. Hopefully, we're well along the way in the zoning code update. Starting late this year, early 2016, I think we should have capacity to start this endeavor, to really develop a historic preservation program. But I think you're right. We're going to have to do a lot of public outreach.
Right.
It's not something that I think we're prepared to do, at this moment, even if we had budget and
Even if you
staffing.
had a budget and you had somebody else hired, like a consultant or the city's architectural historian leading that endeavor, you don't feel as a staff you could handle it right now?
Not right now. Later this year, I think we could. And I think the first step would really be trying to define what is the scope of options, and then doing some public outreach, bringing folks in, and identifying issues and options and constraints.
I think, one of the concerns has always been we don't really have clear guidelines. So obviously this validated list would be probably the first thing that would be nice to have. And unfortunately, you're talking about staffing, but we have some historical homes that are on this list or surveyed that are going to be coming before the Planning Commission, and I think that lack of direction makes it difficult. I'm on board with Gail. I don't think we need a board. It'd be nice to have like a ad hoc group that we could convene when we needed to, that has some real experience in architectural history and preservation, and include other members of the Planning Commission and so on. I like what Los Gatos and Carmel does by having their board, but I think in concept, because I'm glad to hear Gail talk about not tying ourselves in with the state, but this Secretary of Interior standards, I think, is vague in a lot of areas. I mean, it has some guidelines, but it leaves some room for discrepancies. And it also does a thing that I personally don't care for, and that's it makes that person who's trying to restore a home, and I think for the most part people want to do a good job when they come before us, but when they have to try to make their additions or changes be something that looks different, then to me it kind of takes away from the whole concept, and I'm not a big fan of the Secretary of Interior standards. I do like the idea of having this board that could convene with some expertise, but I think we need that list, and we need just real clear guidelines and expectations, what people can expect when they come forward and with these homes, and what they can, where they can go with them. I know we're not a Carmel. I read through their, their historic board, what they do, and they have a little bit different. Well, I guess it's arguably different that they really look at some of their architects who have designed some of their homes. They have those fairy tale homes and stuff. I think it's a little bit different. So maybe we need something that's a little more tailored to what Capitola wants, and make a Capitola thing. I don't think we have that many homes that we can't address those individually, and I give these people some guidelines, because I know we have a couple coming before us fairly soon that is going to leave us in that whole gray area if we're waiting.
So I got to preface my comments here because they're not going to be all that positive with my appreciation for what the staff has done here in general with this whole process, and how great the presentations have been and the thought behind it. I just have trouble with this particular issue. I just don't think we even got close to where we want to be with this. We don't need any enforcement provisions any different from other enforcement provisions to start with. The idea of districts and overlays in Capitola doesn't make any sense to me as a way to figure out what to do about our historic resources. I mean, this is not the San Diego Gaslight District. We got a house here and a house here and a house here. I mean, we just need to get a list, like the gentleman said. We need to get a list of the historic properties, and then what we need is, we can't escape having some standards, because as Commissioner Welch has pointed out, we get applications all the time. What are we supposed to do with them? I mean, we don't want to apply the Department of Interior standards because they don't make any sense for us. We got to have something at this first draft of the ordinance for us to work with when we get historic applications. Maybe it's not going to be as thorough and as good as you ultimately want, but we've got to start with something, or we're not going to be able to know what to do during the interim period with historic applications. So I think we have to kind of go back to square one on this one.
Can you go back to the slide that shows the 5 things that you guys say are going to be in the new zoning? So I think what I just heard Commissioner Newman say is that we need the procedures on how to identify the resources. We need the criteria to identify them. We need to know and have procedures for how to modify them, incentives for people to keep them, and criteria to, how do you tear one down? And what I think I heard you guys say is you're writing something.
This is in our plan. So the update will have these 5 items taken care of within the update, and these are very important.
Right.
But the other options were not, and I should say, I'm not crazy about the zoning overlay either, or they're just other options of what other people are doing, but these 5 will be in the update. So
maybe you could avail yourself of some of the people that will be on a future board to help you draft these for what will be the current zoning ordinances before we can get it all done, all the rest of it done. That you're not doing it in, blind, you've got some input.
So it was kind of my understanding that tonight the direction that they're looking for is, in moving forward, do we want the list, or are we talking overlay or district kind of thing. And what I'm hearing everybody say is we want a list.
Well, I want them to do these 5 things, and then, once we agree upon these 5 things, then I think we decide, do we need a list or not a list? Because, maybe the criteria for identifying a historic resources is clear enough that that will work for us. Maybe, having procedures for how you modify historic resource, that will take care of, the issues that some people have about some of the, smaller homes being torn down. So I think we should get this and then decide where we go from that. Does that work for you, Gail?
For me.
I agree.
And there's another thing about this that I'd like to bring up, and that is I'm looking at the historic features part of our ordinance, which I think we should keep. But there are some things in it that are confusing to me and might be confusing to applicants. And number 8 on that talks about structures. I think we need to make sure that people understand that we are not talking about privately owned homes in this historic features. We're talking about public facilities or public features, the things that are on this. I think we have a list of this too somewhere, and we're not sure exactly. Did you find that today? We're not sure exactly where that is.
I didn't find it today,
You
but
know,
I
the
think
chairs-
these went to the council, and the council adopted
I think I was on the
these
council when we did.
features.
And it's Cherry Street Wall, it's the wharf, it's those kinds of things.
The
And
stairway,
I think we need to
the-
make sure in
Yeah.
this historic features that people understand these are public features that are not privately owned. That's my comment.
But yeah, there may be one on there that's not publicly owned.
So the only other thing that I wanted to add is relative to the Historic Resources Board. And I'm going to kind of come off the wall on this one. I've experienced a lot of ad hoc committees that Capitola has put in place. Some of them work and do a job, and some of them are a group of people that get together and they study it and they talk about it and they come with recommendations and nothing happens. It doesn't go anywhere. I'd really like to see in the process a board put together that reviews the projects before they ever get to the Planning Commission. And they come to the Planning Commission with not only a recommendation of whether it's historic or not, but they work with the owners and the architects to determine which of the 4, I mean, do you restore it, preserve it, rebuild it, within local Capitola guidelines, not within Secretary of Interior standards. But when it comes to the Planning Commission, it's already been vetted to a great extent about the impact of that historic resource on the community.
I think we could talk about that under architectural, Arc and Site next time, because I think that could work very well, something like that could work very well in Arc and Site. I think we were talking today about the possibility of our contract architectural historian be the one who is on Arc and Site, so that they're the person who's going to be doing all the DPRs, and over the years they're going to learn what we want here in Capitola, what we're looking for, which is what the community has decided on. That, so we could, I think that's a good possibility. We could do that during Arc and Site.
Okay, does that give you clear direction?
I'll try to summarize.
Okay.
So what I've heard is definitely to move forward with the drafting of these 5 zoning code provisions. In the beginning of the discussion, there was direction towards an ad hoc committee, which would be made up of our local historian working at the museum, a few planning commissioners, and a few city council members. I'm not sure, and I'd like some more clarity of if you'd like that to occur at this stage, or once we have, I've heard like to start that process now and have this committee started to begin looking at the next steps for guidelines and a list. And I've also heard we'd like to see the zoning code provisions drafted, and maybe their first assignment is to review those
Well, I think it
changes.
should also include the architectural historian, our staff architectural historian. And I think in the long run, right now, we can't hire them. You don't have time to oversee the hire of them to begin these guidelines and all of that. But I think, some group of people could help draft these new ordinances so that when they come to us, we're at square B. They have, some, because I don't think, I don't know any of you who might know some of the things that we've come into problems with over the years having to do with this. So I think having some amount of people to help you draft these ordinances and come to us with a draft of those, it would help. It would help you. I think we'd get farther faster.
And I'm probably going to, again, show ignorance. I do that every meeting, but because Frank Perry is our architectural historian.
No,
Curator
he's not.
of the
He's the
museum.
curator at our museum.
Okay. So I was going to say his background is who's our architectural
So
historian?
it's Leslie Dill and Franklin Maggi Associates?
Oh, the ones that the one that does the reports is APR.
Right.
Okay.
Is that right?
Okay.
They are on
Then
contract,
I'm on.
right?
So
Because I heard our museum historian on, which I'm not opposed to, but I just want to be sure that we have an architectural historian on board with.
I would highly recommend having a conversation with the museum curator, because I don't believe that his experience and expertise in Capitola is really going to put him in the right place for doing this job. And his whole focus is really different.
Yeah, that was my concern. I thought that's what we were
So it's
talking
very
about there.
different.
So.
Well, my point was, I think at some point there's going to be manpower needed to do research on historic lists and those kinds of things. And I certainly believe with the resources that are available at the museum, that's something that he could assist these guys with. We do, as I said, as a city, we pay a lot of money to have a museum, which is pretty rare to have a city-run museum and city employees. So I think we ought to try and take advantage of all of our employee resources and do the best we can. That's all I'm saying. And I certainly wouldn't want to put Frank in a position where we ask him to do something that he didn't feel comfortable or qualified to do. It's just, could he offer some assistance to them? But going back, I would like to see these guys write up these sections. And I think it's great if, when you get them written, if you want to send them to, Gail or Carolyn Swift, who has a great deal of history, and you can, give them some of your comments. I mean, staff always likes to get input and pass something by someone who's knowledgeable on an issue. But it's important for them to go forward and get these written without creating any kind of committee or anything else, or else it'll be 2 years from now before we do anything.
Right. No, I agree. I think it's just input, I think, is what I'm
Yep.
talking about.
Does that make sense?
That's very clear. Thank you. So in summary, we're going to move forward with these 5. We'll be drafting them, and once they are drafted, we'll be reaching out to more than, we'll reach out to other experts in this field
And get
locally.
the input after they have the draft, before we get it.
Okay. Thank you, and it's now 9 o'clock.
It is now 9 o'clock, which means that the last item on the agenda will slide off to next meeting. But I think we made great headway tonight.
You had that figured out pretty well, didn't you?
No director's report tonight?
No, Madam
Any
Chair.
other commission comments tonight? With that, then, we will adjourn the meeting to the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission, which is June 4th, Thursday, June 4th, 7 p.m. right here. Thank you very much.
Short meeting.